It was with an iron purpose venomous in my heart and an iron jaw set that I had set about that night on the eve of the day the city would be stormed by the Vandals and a surrender forced. I had enough of Bonifacius' limitations upon those he had left behind. I was heading to the docks, the dry dock, the silt upon that quadrième that was in place barricaded by the open water, a levee composed of a dike and 9 pins deep in the sandy substrate, by 4 ropes on the sandy side. If the 9 pins, really gargantuan blocks of basalt, lost their constraints to the towering posts, all along the levee they would tumble along the pressures of the water and they would give way. The water would flood the dry dock, sinking that was not sea ready, scuttling almost anything else. Comus, the Count Bonifacius, he would not take my friends from me, I thought with grim metal. The ship may not be ready, but I knew Lycurgus better than that. He would be down by the docks in the ship in sea readiness, preparing the leaks from the termites and cleaning the cargo bilge of vermin and barnacles. So I carried with me a scythe of the fields, used by the farmer monks for harvesting what they could to provide people in better times. Those times had passed, and I thought it would be used for severing thick boughs of brawny rope and toppling basalt poles that stemmed from the water, from the beach where the Nigrum Saturtine was positioned. I would sever my ties from Hippo ridges and burn any bridges behind us, both for me and the crew I yearned to save. I planted my seat in the sand with the scythe. I was curious whether the burst of seawater would immediately break my legs or carry me off into a whirlpool and drown me immediately. There were guards, but they weren't watching in the quick black of the night. I saw, and I began sawing through the first 4 ropes. They were hard as stone from the petrified salt that rimed them. My arms ached until they burned with acid out of exertion, but the first of the 4 ropes was cut. Nothing happened. The basalt pinched or stayed right where it was. I nimbly scampered over the sands and began sawing the next 4. Again, once they were free, the water did not rush forward and carry me away. It was only when I severed the rope of the 3rd pillar that a leak, then a torrent, burst forth, nearly breaking my knees and my toes deep in the sand. It doused me and stung my eyes, and I couldn't see straight as I ran out of the way of the first breach and began sawing into the 4th pillar. "What are you doing, madman?" Voices of the guards cried out. They then resolved to let me drown and deal with me once I was washed upon with the freed lot. The salt water could not carry the basalt pillars beyond where it was anchored and built up in the sand, and spared me from being crushed from them. The waters pulled me up and I spun like a top, and the waves bounced into the stinging sand, but soon I found my footing and poked my shoulders and head above the water. In a torrent I freed the remaining ropes, and the water crashed into the lock, kicking around my legs in the deep, where 2 sawing Navias and the Negrum Sacerdote were grounded. Awoken from within the bowels of the ship with a familiar voice. "Guards!" Sagittarius called. I answered for me. "It's me, Sagittarius." "What in heaven's name are you doing here?" Sagittarius called back. "The ship is my second home. I can't sleep in the inn, however I try." He left the interior of the ship and climbed out into the bow. "Will you save yourselves instead of heading from this doomed city, Centurio? You haven't given me much choice if our ship is in a wreck after this, and in God's name stop using mine. Christ, the rats are rising up from deep below. You've done it this time. They would start biting him soon." My goal had not to been killed by the Triarchus. I cast my scythe into the waters and waded through the rushing rapids and pulled myself up on the docks, which too might be swamped by unequal water. I spat water, and the water behind me rose to brink to the docks. The 2 Eudocia Navias, smaller vessels, began rocking in the frothing waters, crashing from each other in their insignia, their prows. They would break soon, but our the Nigrum Saturtine was swirling about in the white waters, rising from its sandy berth. Gradually the ship rose, and the 2 others crashed and splintered as it tipped into the murk. "By God, the ship is rising! By God, you've done it! I've tended to her readiness every day with Lycurgus. Now go to the inn, wake Lycurgus, Caesarea, Ammius, and the rest of the Rodriguez you can find. I don't know how you plan on outrunning the skiffs sent by the city to bring us in, or the Vandal counter vessels, but we will try. I have no chance in mind, Triarchus. The Umber of Aspar's passing retreat by the sea will hide us from suspicion. We'll sail by the morning light to Naples in their shadow and not even be noticed." Soaked, I ran as far as my feet would take me from the Aphrodisium to the inn. The salt water stung my feet and arrived, uncaring for any pain. When I arrived, I saw the lanterns were still on, and I hollered for Caesarea to wake up. "Do you not know it's the eve of battle? Let us sleep, lover boy, or you'll be condemned once more. Too late for that. We're sailing with the Mormon light. The ship is freed, I said with a shivering, stammering voice. The waters were cold as they dried me in the nights of summer. He's come to answer your childish prayers, Syria, Lecard said from within the window of his inn. The church's freedom of Caesar, Ammius called out in the night. A chance for survival. Now prayers, the devil dares. Now off. Now bring what you can carry in Sarkina. Rouse the rowers, the Retrigus, Taranta Pareta, and the Nautis. We returned to the Abidius and grappled under the ship until the ladder could be hoisted into the decks in the dock. The guards were outnumbered by the time we had arrived, some 15 strong, and walked with mute fascination as we boarded the ship and ordered the oarsmen to navigate around the 2 nearly submerged wrecks of the Lusaria and Avius. Those damaged alone would invalidate their pact with Bonifacius and put them in debt for their lives, if not slavery. But I had given them little choice but a little fortunace of this crew. Bonifacius' protection was now out of question once he had learned of this, if he did at all. With his keen eyes, Tarantus sighted the lighthouse on the far pier to the end where the ships of Aspar were sailing home, with a liberated Martian in their company. We charted a course by candlelight to travel in his wake of the Armada to the limes of Sicily and headed north. If it were not for Genseric's Omen and Mercy, these ships would be without the officers and would be left easy targets for whatever marauded our route. We rowed around the wrecked ship and scraped it on our hull with grinding shudder, and soon we were free, and we were in the harbor. We raised the sails. Perhaps 4 buoys had passed in the darkness of port where we could see fires breaking out. The sacking and burners of Hippiorigius had begun. Dracontes would fight until the morning winds took us cruising, but he would surrender soon and likely join the Vandals in service rather than face the noose. All he needed to do was bow to the new king. A vicious one, that Genseric, the spider said, looking at the port side of the city we'd barely escaped. I shook my head. He will take some satisfaction, but for him this is vindication. Genseric is born to war. He was born from the crossing the Rhine and the death of his father. He has a capital gain, but a score to settle. He and his people, my people, have waited for a home for decades, and now they finally have it. December 31st, 406. The east side of the Rhine River. In the depths of the winter, the Rhine had frozen over and was ready to be crossed. Genseric was 17 years old when his father had attempted to cross the Rhine to the Roman side of the river. At that age, much like myself, he would have been a fighting age among barbarians and expected to prove himself to his father. Those were times of gangrene and frostbite across the icy wastes and forests of northern Germania, until they came literally to the frozen crossing that would strip the flesh from feet just by walking on its surface. A vast assembly of refugees from the Hun expansion, Quade, Horula, Vandals, Alans, Gepids, Burgundians, and Alemanni had assembled on the eastern side of the river. They had Germanic culture in common and were driven apart by their loyalties to their tribal kings, elders, tribal identity, and their gods, some Aryans, some pagans. And the king of the Vandals was god Gezel. He had 2 sons, one with a Vandal wife and one with a Roman slave. The son of the Roman slave woman was Genseric. What these barbarian groups had in common above all else was a desire to seek warmer climes and live through looting the interior of Gaul. This brought him into contention with the Franks, who controlled the territory just to the east of the Roman borders. For over 100 years, the Romans allowed them to settle on both sides of the river, and was a raiding party that preyed on migrants that had come to the crossing near the canal that the Romans allowed the Franks to use for transit. Shortly, there was a clash with the Franks on the east side of the river against the Alans and Vandals, and it was during this time that Genseric, not yet injured, saw his first show of war. It must have been a defining moment in his experiences, because the Vandals were nearly wiped out by the Franks in the battle, and his father, Dr. Gezel, was killed in battle. It was only due to the assistance of the Alans and the Vandals were saved, and the Franks defeated, a good deed that would be repaid after the death of Attachis. That would be the first sediment in a lasting friendship between the two peoples. By that time they were on the Roman side of the river, for which they crossed over sleet and the ice of the crossing. His older half-brother Gunderic was king, newly king. Some believe the riding injury of Genseric had happened during this battle against the Ripuarian Franks. Never once to forget or forgive the inhospitable welcome of the Romans to the refugees, those groups that crossed the Rhine soon sacked settlements to the west of the river. Mogiatanum Gustavandiorum, Decortatorum, and Argentoratum, and many cities on the edge of Germania and Gallia Belgia. Like many peoples in migration, early service to the empire often meant hunted by those who signed into alliance or federation with the Romans in exchange for land to settle on, and the Vandals were no different from these unfortunate kingdoms, like the Burgundians. They were turned away or driven out from nearly everywhere they traveled, and been on the run under his brother's rule ever since. Back in the spring of 432, now that time had passed, Africa, once coveted by Alaric, king of the Visigoths, in 410, an isolated and fertile resting place for his people, was in Vandalic hands. Alaric had only turned back given the promise of Narbonensis in southern Gaul, and his premature death and ascension of his half-brother Attila. With the fall of Hipporegus in early 432, after 14 months of siege, Hipporegus was made capital of the new Vandalic kingdom under Genseric, and Pachideus was made its proconsul for his duplicity and wealth. The Vandal days from running from Roman tyranny were over, and that was the new kingdom they were leaving behind. Fortunes were changing in the mainland as well, and we would soon realize that we had traded one perilous domain of Bonifacius for another, and that it was well into the favor of Gallia Placidia as still. I did notice one thing watching the Aphrodisian light in the dark as we left and sailing for the rising sun of Italy. The place where the Church of Augustine had been spared from the ravages of the Vandals. The fires were sporadic and placed at homes of immense wealth or houses of centurions, it seemed. Although the rewards for troops with plunder, it was an orderly looting by his design. Genseric wanted to make his presence known and reward his troops for over a year's siege, but he did not want his prize or its traditions damaged beyond repair. I told these stories of dark years of the Vandals to pass the time, mostly to Taranto and Caesarea and Sagittarius, who had taken up the habit of not talking to me, and only Ammius and the buffeting wind upon our sails and the shout of our naughtiest kept us entertained. Lycurgus asked me why I had gone through all that trouble with them, and I replied that the Vandals would not spare Vandals, or in the city at arms against them, being a city that was certain to fall. They would be seen as traitors and deserters, and I truly blamed Bonifacius for enforcing their contract to the letter and keeping me from their company on pain of stripes on my back. The stripes on my back. We sailed from the morning light 2 days later, traveling from the wake of Aspar's Armada, which returned to Constantinople, and we were in Naples. Southern Italy, moreover all of Italy, was known for its beautiful diverse terrain and clear air of elevation, being more mountainous in the north and east where the Apennines stood, and sunny weather had not picked a better time to land in the province than the primavera that graped us on the rich soil of the volcano Vesuvius's umbrage. The air was crisper here, more suited to horticulture, and was unbreathing from the oppressive humidity of Africa's summers. For it was in this weather that the tourists of the empire came, and for its games and libertine attitudes. All cypresses, beach resorts, and citrus groves, all a bustling port that found quick buyers for the wares we had smuggled from Africa. The people were rich, opulent even, and they had expansive villas with their own baths and saunas that sprawled across the countryside. Oftentimes one could see the borders of a city from another, and we traveled to the port finding inns to stay at after securing the caretaking of our ship in the harbor. They were haughty at worst and welcoming if we were family at best, and it was in this hospitality that we kept people from asking questions from where we had arrived. We had reached civilization, and it was pleasant to enjoy the sports at the hippodrome and the arena, where the contest would be admired outside the setting of war, but in the civic harmony. I told the crew we'd find friends in the city, and sure enough, Posideius was waiting for me at the church 2 weeks into our stay. We'd brought mostly coin with us. Our supplies, which lasted the siege, could be replaced. I explained in the months since Bonifacius' departure, Gallia Placidia had welcomed him as a returning hero to Ravenna, granting him the title of patrician. The fortunes of a lost war were not quite so kind to Flavius Aetius, who as Magister Militus per Gallius, or the military commander of Gaul, had risen to the consulate of the empire, only to be dispossessed of his office with Bonifacius' return in value. Not only had Aetius, with his military upbringing as a hostage, first under Alec and then the Hunnic kings, he had also raised an army of Huns to serve the usurper Euianus during the civil war, where Aspar had sent by Theodosius to place Valentinian III on the throne of the West. When Aetius arrived in Italy with his army, Jonas was already killed, and Aetius compromised with Galicia for military power instead of open war. Serving many great campaigns, the regent had warned her son, Valentinian, that Aetius was a great military commander, and the position of commander of both land and mounted armies should be left to someone less powerful. Bonifacia, having just lost his domain in Africa, fit that bill perfectly. And it was Asper, not Aetius, who tried to deliver Hippos when the two had met on the battlefield before, when Johannes had tried to take the throne after Honorius' death. During his time in Gaul and Rhaetia and Noricum, Aetius had garnered many friends within the military, and many among the Huns, including the Hunnic king Rua. He would not be dispossessed or honed in on and eliminated without a fight, but a fight was coming. Stationed in Gaul after the defeat of the Bacaudian Franks, few knew. He had many enemies, including the wealthy senator Maximus Petronius, who had served as consul once. And Bonifacius never had forgiven the general Aetius for his perceived complicity in the war against Africa due to a misunderstanding, believing Aetius had forged the letter. Posidonius warned me not to return by way of the sword, and soon after I told him of our flight from Hippocrates not to reintegrate with the military towns of the new patrician, and that Aetius lands in the north would be the safest way for our runaways now. So I advised Sagittarius we should leave for Gaul, where we might find protection to Aetius, perhaps even pay his guards, and the ship would be in safe care of the church, now that Posidonius now controlled in Naples. Besides, Aetius had been recently asked to tame the Suevi on behalf of the bishop, and the Suevi had robbed me of my father. We bought Cal disguises first. The Count might not be looking for us, but his Gothic Buscalaria, seated across Italy, would be on the lookout for our crew. Then we bought fleet Iberian horses and hired a baggage train to take us to the position of Flavius Aetius' army north on the Maracchia River near the Adriatic in northern Italy, not far from Ravenna. The Via Flaminia, 432. We'd seen Rome from the south, where the towers of the Porta San Paolo loomed on the edge of the sky, a city of 7 walls, and defied my expectations, having never seen the city before, walls of that magnitude. But we did not stay near. We stopped only with the cartwright outside to ensure our caravan would not run out in the mud or break a wheel. We had taken the Via Appia north to Rome and circumvented the city, running through the pastures outside the eternal city, then resuming on the road to Rimini. We sat around a campfire near a baggage train one night, on the road north from Ancona on the Via Flaminia, that led from Rome to Rimini. Several other travelers taking the same road as us, and the men in our company had dwindled to 9 when the Rodriguez signing on for other boats that set sail from Naples, mostly merchant. Ammius sat in one of those carriages, his leg dangling from a ramp that had brought the pig spit to our fire. We would need each to eat our fill and gather our strength, because we were planning on making the next leg of our travel within 2 days straight and nights to the Macciones, the rest villa, where the cartwrights could replace our wheels and the veterinarians could tend to our horses that were overburdened from the final trip at the bridge of Tiberius. The fire had attracted a Scythian Roman soldier, of Hunnic stock by the looks of him. Also, his 5 soldiers had joined him down from their horses, who carried lassos, signs that they were from the east. There was a checkered-robed woman following us well, but she mostly stayed at her own fire, not far from behind, and was visited frequently by these soldiers. Also a Roman merchant, who said he had traveled as far as Gallia Belgica, and had warmed herself by our fire, as well as a tall man as emaciated as a horse, pale in skin. The merchant, who was an apothecary of some kind, thought the tall man was a thief, and that the woman behind us, the camp follower, a whore. The Scythian had thin Asiatic couples for eyes, and a freckled complexion with long, wiry, reddish-brown goatee, and had helped himself to more of our pork than was polite. He was fairer for a Hun, but I thought better of asking of his origins. Those stout creatures with their scarred face were scarcely human, lower even than the barbarians of the highbrow Roman eyes. He had introduced himself as Trostilo. The merchant's name was Eudocia Anna, and the tall man made no introductions, just demanded that we afford him some rounded rump and some bread for his horse. Even the Hun's looks were less fierce than that one. Anna was going on about the state of the Empire. Why would Flavius Aetius travel so far south he didn't mean to demand his titles back, just as he had done with Gallio Placidia long ago? I'm staying away from him. Civil war is brewing, Anna said. We're staying away from him too. We've heard that there's land to be had in Pannonia. That's so suspected in the local merchants in Naples always carving an edge for their sunbathing tourists, said Sagittarius to Anna. Sagittarius knew that if our guests examined any of our papers, they would trace back to the mansiones outside Naples, which we had crossed past the walls of Rome and made our way further on the road. And you were settlers and merchants with the size of that carriage, perhaps some barter to be done. May I examine your wares? Anna asked. Certainly, Caesarea said, curtsying. I'll take you to see them. Many thanks, Domina. Trostio went out to his horse, and from one of his saddlebags he retrieved a jug of wine. Wine! For our friends on this vigil, perhaps a song of Orestes, he motioned to the tall man. We poured our wine into the cups and he held water. We didn't want to get too drunk for professional soldiers, or with professional soldiers, and Caesarea had already warned them not to rob us, as they were more than capable in a fight with us. Sing a bit for our friends from Naples so they may share our wine. Plainly, they wanted us to get drunk and scarf down more of our pork and perhaps steal from our caravan. These roads were known for the thieves, doubly placed in places of rest. The tall man went to his horse and fetched a Zamfir bagpipe sewn from a goat's bladder. He said a little but made to impress us and the soldiers with the song. He blew on the pipes intermittently, drumming and stridulating with the thighs as drums, crying out into the night air. I tell you of the Goliath son of Tengri and Bacchus, Rua, whose marrow the sick drowning rain of the four winds could not content, whom Theodosius' men called Nightmare before they took their post, with dread-wet eyes and carrion buried and compost. On their shield the eighth returned, riddled with bolts, of the honing-darted horses of men. O mothers would meant, no mothers would consent, to rue the pale nor bale man with the lassos of spider webs. For in Scythian the daimyo also is a lion's den, and where he dwells you're dead and red, and never gone or been. So do not traipse these Romans or Persians, for the nightmare that leaves your bed, of the Hunnic-hooded darted horses of men's, or that devotee of Tengri, that giant blood-pang tyrant. It was an extol of greatness, or a warning, I wondered. We drank heartily to shake off images of that song, which was jolly by step standards, from our heads, and shared a joke or two with Trostilo and Orestes, who did not laugh at anything. I said, Why is Gallio Placidia so sour at Aetius? Winking at Trostilo and Orestes, they waited, smiling. If you were a puppet having Flavius Aetius' hands up your skirt for 5 years, you'd have to dance about. You'd be too. They did raise an eye at each other, but did not laugh. After a while, our oarsmen, who had signed on to tend the carts, led Amnius, with the permission of Sagittarius, to go visit the camp father, who hoped to be a prostitute, accompanied by more prostitutes. Sagittarius reluctantly agreed and told them not to spend all of her wages. They scampered off giddily, looking for action. Eudocia Anna emerged from the coach, laughing off his bald head with seemingly happy-looking Caesarea. He nodded to the tall man, and then to the soldiers. Sagittarius, you know I've served in 5 campaigns, right? This is an infernal joke. Trostilo spat. My hand went quickly to the Francesca ascot beside what was missing. The tall man, Orestes, patted it in the dirt next to him. Lycurgus sighed and put his hands over his head. That's my job, jesting that catamite Hebrew god to death, he said under his breath. The sign of an urchin on the wrist with a pretty girl with scars, military substitutes for supplies made for a sapping of a siege, accents that well may be from Leptis Magna, disguises. Trostilo reached into his pocket and removed the mustache with a strip of cloth and honey in one hand and placed it on Sagittarius' petrified face, who suddenly realized he had ablated his back. And that merchant Anna was leading Caesarea down the ramp. With a swift kick to the back of the head, he knocked Amnius from the cart unconscious. Germanic Africans who stink of a port in Naples. There's just been a war on there. Who are you going to spy on, then? Trostilo took out his long knife and carved some prime rib from the pig. We spent some time in Africa. Who hasn't? Sagittarius said quietly. Trostilo nodded. Sagittarius shouted for one of his oarsmen to return, quickly. Gildas, he shouted. That's my girl, with 5 of my other men, Trostilo answered for her. Orestes, start digging the hole. The Question, Sagittarius, is where we were going to spy on, Ravenna or Rimini. If you're headed to Rimini, you're Goths. If you're headed to Ravenna, you're Vandals. Either way, I have to kill you. Just looking at your ragtime ensemble, you're no Bucellarii, and I have to say that's your only way out of this. Correct. We're Vandals, I answered. Rusty walked away leaning on a horse and retreated with shovel. He began digging a hole not far from their fire. Start praying with your next breath, Trustee shot back at me. Now it's my turn. Lassos, a merchant from Gaul, accent from Scythia, songs of the Huns, professional campfellows from a standing army. You're looking for spies on orders of Flavius Aetius. I looked at him imploringly despite my fear. Maybe so and maybe not. What of it? Thrasio said. We're headed that way. We'll join the consul's army in exchange for safety in Gaul. We've run afoul of Bonifacius. Remove my shirt. You'll see white stripes in the brand. The brand was that of Bonifacius. You could only be looking for spies for one reason. Civil war is brewing. You should take us with us. The soldier cut through my linen tunic with a sword, sawing in the back shoulder was revealed from the left side. He isn't lying. They're enemies of Bonifacius, or slaves, he said. Obviously, you're not a Bucellarii. I'm not a slave, but a pirate. I've killed a centurion of his personal guard. That brand means the present crime of murder of an officer, I explained, confident that it marked their identity well. I am a Bucellarii, Trusteo answered deadpan. Seconds went by and I searched his eyes as if he was toying with me. Then began laughing mightily as men howled with laughter. Trusteo rose and examined the brand, poking with Scottish. So it does. Have their crew blindfolded. Keep their leaders close to me. We're leaving now. They obeyed to be taken captive along with me, trusting that this camp of Flavius Aetius would be free then, and give them service to go along with their sight. The caravan left in the darkness and trekked many miles, and for the rest of them to piss and wipe for leaves, before riding on at a fever pace, one that was expecting war. The camp of Flavius Aetius, north of Rimini, the river Arminius. The camp of Flavius Aetius was a whirlpool draining to the central Grand Command, a towering pitch of stakes and canvas of the general. A demoted champion was still a champion, and the rumors whispered that Aetius could not accept his disposition. All the gathering, around tents placed on the river, knew that war was coming, and the empress would have no choice but to accept Aetius if Comus Bonifacius was defeated on the field. Aetius's numbers, bolstered by his exile in the mountains, where Rui the Hull dwelt with his horde. If there was a man for the Gallic Romans to believe in, it was this Magistre Militae, who had just triumphed over the Franks, Germanic horsemen known for their throwing axes at Cambriacum and Tauracum. He had defeated the Frankish king Clodio and his subordinate 1 year later. It was regimented bandits of Gaul, the Bacauti and Rhaetia. The entire Gallic command was under him, and it was from this dangerous position to apply too much pressure, as everyone learned from Aetius already. In 426, Arelate, one of the largest cities in our nemesis in southern Gaul, was besieged by Theodoric, king of the Visigoths, and his defenses succeeded under this general's command. So most of his support flowed from the north and west, just as Bonifacius' support flowed from the capital. And Gallia should not have put the general in this position, for his command of so many men in the open, but no authority to be used them as only held by the consulate. The consul was a Scythian, presumably Gothic stock, and was noble Italian mother, his wife, and the daughter of a Roman named Carpilia. His son, therefore, held great status in the capital, as long as the cloud of his family's influence was wedged between Bonifacius and his total command. Trastero was not only loyal, he was trusted by the general himself, and in some playing part in the road he had done an excellent job, as I had rarely such fervor to a personality cult in the gaunt Hun to the general. His brother-at-arms, another centurion, was Attila, a barren man with large sunken eyes, whose fat arms looked like they'd been hammered from salted slabs of meat the horsemen fed on. Racks of pikes, each unique in their jagged edges, stuck up from the black pitch of the field, and the tans of animal hides holding aloft banners of the Roman eagle devouring a serpent. The clangs of heavy spears and sword against the wooden dummies echoed in the encampment as every image of a breach. Stakes had been set up in impromptu defense from an attack that never came. A circular wall of 10 inlets where the stragglers came through from all over the country, desperate for the first proper meal in days, crackling in the spits and the charnel pits were scratched across the camp like pin stars above. Trustilo and Attila took to introducing the pirates to the other criminals in the camp, those who would make a living after looting after they had victory, and let them resolve this amongst themselves, how the spoil would be divided in favor to take this advantage during the battle or in the district of Romania. After decades in Africa, some see Count Boniface as an upstart and an outsider, an African rebel. We gather from across the empire to teach him that one banner still does not respect that which has been fallen out, that has been called back from foreign lands, Trostio said. The men gathered in the night as though it was last, and it may have been. The Count was favored to triumph over any uprising, but the promises of Aetius were too much, and the men knew what they would mean to Valentinian, and hesitantly Placidia should he arise on top. In age past, the mob was fickle. Now the regions were fickle to whatever power could ensure their legacy. Already the clamor for best position on the battle, that which would be fought on the bridge of Romania, had begun. The place in the formations to come saw your likelihood for survival. They saw your future. But the camp was chaos to those new, strong-fisted masters. A weakling could not be molested so long as he mentioned the son of the newly dispossessed magister's name, Carpelio. So it circled around those that did not. It circled around those that could not form allies, and the hostages of Trustilo went unnoticed amidst the traitor hunting and drinking and brawling. Trustilo gave him an accompanied leash and their old weapons of peace and deal and wares they had brought from Neapolis. Hun-hating Roman, Roman-hating Hun, Roman and Hun-hating Rhaetian were more Roman than half the Romans. None were considered more hated than the stock of the Britannics. Those romantic British soon condemned by the reality of Valentinian's situation in edict soon. Our Turk judged the Vortigern here, by spite of his happily committed name. Latin gave virtue in a swarm of nomads, who were the Hibernian and Picts that dug ditches. If their legacy was your name, you'd never be accepted by those on the mainland, whose proud Latin ring gave them the semblance of whole when in this late hour in the empire they were divided. They hated and had each other. Those who had their pride were always called bridesmaid and never the bride, and so the child of Joannes, who called him as Sicula, left the barbarous Saxon, the Easterner, as stepsaddle. Cato was unsuitable for being brains, and not one of their own. They say if you run with pups, you'll never be ready to run with wolves, but this was dragons. Those birds that had been dug up had been planted in the middle of this Iranius ruckus. So the dragon was the gullible and didn't know better than the strong would rise to the top like foam of stiff mead. And any hint of Christendom would be a mistake, realized too late that the earth was dog-eat-dog and everything else was bloody superstition, and those dragons would answer to their surroundings. A youthful man with the barrel chest of the Adriatic Mountains, with tapestries of the southern starlit horizon, paced on the banks of a shallow end of the river Marachia, the river Armenius. He was pale as a lemur, half Scotia, but he had rings of olives around the edges that would shine golden if the cloisters of Aetius' son, Carpelio. Those lungs were full, but the tight knit of his innards would not let the bulge of air in his gut show through. His ruddy horse Demetrius was tied nearby, and he conversed with the wistful daughter in the awe of heaven above him on this the night the company of Galorith was taken to the saluted camp of Aetius, I, Galorith. And on that spore's star he swears he will return, she soothed. She was speaking of her father, sentimental as absence across the continent. It was Polaris, as far as he could tell, the star of the young man's Nana, where the elders said her soul would be interred when she passed. He thought of the odds from the youth, the bleak night skies, and the cities both having to pass that they saw clear, where they had chosen the spot of their rendezvous with the spirits. The cool waters of the river ran over his toes, and the water felt clean and refreshing, far from the sewer and gutter water that flew from the rooftops to the streets in Ravenna. Those heaven yawns above him, and he thought the earth was a complex cloth of black satin, with holes punched through to Elysium. Luna glowed in her airy smile, lighting up the surface of water. Some star showed brighter, he thought. He walked to the river. Do you think Christ was a magician? Why, those fishermen confused the bodies with the Dead Sea. He shouted, his toes digging into the rocks that lined the shallows of the river. He had the route memorized by now, left by the pallet, right to the crag, dancing like some Jesus liturgy stood on the shining waters glimmering with moonlight. He rarely wore sandals, and they were off now, his leggings rolling up. Carpelio was a boy of riches, and with that came debauchery. When the sickly yellow horse mounted the foals who were injured, Carpelio would exclaim, "That is ghastly Cato, his whiskers made for prowl on the rocks of the rivers." But seeing the tears in Grid, who was seemly, he could not think to pierce her, and was mortified at confusing their souls and their spirits with earthly virtue. They confuse me with jackals because I am only one who bends an ear to the injured, he thought. She loved him and trusted him, and he loved her and trusted her, but like a child groom, a passant save for favor for only one, he cursed to himself. There was the Levantine. He had been seduced by her eyes in the church's choir, and prematurely sworn his soul to her in pursuit. As his parents had often said before hitting him once he started something, he didn't stop. He would be seen as a strangeling, a eunuch, a coward, a pederast when he had entered his fool's pack before he forsook his oath, acknowledged by nothing but the desire for the heavens to pursue him happiness. He resolved that if he tried hard enough, anything was possible. The Levantine thought he had the look of a Seculi, the hardy tribes that had once inhabited Sicily, or a nomad, and only accepted him because he was the kith of her Celtic brother and sisters, who knew him as a singing clown mouse, and whose elders saw a promise of a catamite or a brothel stud for his mindless self-indulgence. Carpelio, who was the head of the lower household of Aetius, wouldn't allow it, and the young man, sure as heaven, wouldn't allow it either. Deianopera, his sister, who rendered his state with him when he was disposed from carousing all night, also saw him as a bull, but as a brother, and he was only able to see her as he guarded her door when his sister did things. But he longed to breathe life into her. He longed to quarrel with his sister, and the promise forbidden so much sweeter than the forsaken he had the Levantine. She was his younger sister, but she had taken to the gifts of older men, and so she had introduced him to the mead and the nod and the garum. He had been inducted into the sloth earlier by purpose of this telling. Galarith, his mentor. The rat's name will go unmentioned until he is introduced properly. Those physical gifts were for the Levantine only, so he would suffer until the end of time, breaking the promise to the Lord. At least long enough for this clever daughter to dry her eyes and trust him yet another day. He walked from the waters as company stooped and laughed and leered, then to his jesting. He walked to the red-headed girl. I've never been so abandoned, so I do not know your pain, and I will not abandon you. You will return, but not tonight, so let's off from the hovel and drink from the horn until we know not we're the only ones here. He's up there watching and I'm down here, so I'll be on my best behavior. No, you will not, and she yelled, jabbing at his ribs, but he laughed and walked off with her into the night. Trusteo was gambling. Adults practice risk investment. Youths practice risk. One investment was the deal he had struck with the Gorgon sitting across the table with him. Spoils were often divided in this ways, but the spoils to come, the spoils from the confrontation to Bonifacius' army, were ferreting out an Aran army as they spoke. He hoped to cut that deal quickly, but the braggart before him had protections. If Galarith broke such an agreement, he would be tortured without reproach from any law or government. He would be a ghost. He was Ugly's investment. He was cunning to take advantage of the newcomers. They didn't know the probability of failure. He was one such risk, played by the entrepreneur girlfriend of Carpelio, wise beyond her age. And he would bet the only one Germanic in the camp, and it was her. God, she had the tits of a Saxon sow and the face of one of Papal Leo's angels. With the troublesome freckles you could never properly count in mid-thrust if you weren't drunk. Youths practiced risk. He had made a number of friends in the camp, but none called him brothers, especially Longface, the foreman. Longface was an exaggeration to the size of gentility. He looked as if he had been smacked by God himself, a Roman of inordinate boasting and saber-rattling to anyone deemed unarmed enough to be curs. Men-at-arms, smart as men as arms, never unsheathed their sword, and the richer older men told them to. Trusteo was one such sword, and Ugly was not. His eyes contained malaise, the brightest sort that cropped from patrician eyes, and his skull had been raked over with a razor, not patrolly as he had entered adulthood, and the crowns that came from these Italians. Ugly had bought his brother. The Ugly did not keep it with his horse. Unfortunately, that raised Aetius's man's ire to women, who were usually unarmed. His women. And that woman's bitch, or was it Carpelius, who could never tell with those who put a pot from Silesia to their reverse imprinting that made him shrivel like winter in the summer. What with Priscilla on the river? He called them jerkins. It was a play on words because his mindless self-indulgence and his love for the noble women's clothes Carpelia afforded. As long as he wasted time with Deianopera, the sister, the wild-tempested woman he'd claimed more brawling than bear than waif, he would be jerkins for life. Trosteo snorted to himself, offering his ward to Aetius to throw still playing his card. By the time the payment had come, he would be gone. The protections from the Magister afforded, Bonifacius defeated, youths practiced risk. Gallia Placidia had once exclaimed, "These prouts have the galls to demand assistance when they cut themselves in the kitchen." Aetius could afford defeat. Sebastianus would always fall back on the power of his rival, but there were mercenaries and eager fighting men in the north of Italy who were overpowered that could always be relied on should Aetius have to lick his wounds. The conch shell had a white chalky knot along the fuzzy cotton herb of the indica plant which grew in the mountain of Maurians as weed here in Europe. The match burned at the core of the nug, making it glow like an ember. It was described as soothing, sedative, not aggressive. The opium coursed through the lungs of young Cato. His mate-to-be, the Scythian child, sat on the cot in the tent before her. His eyes were transfixed on her, her arms so pallid, so sun-cursed like his own. What a lie, to judge those that ran from the Sanhara. See, whatever distance, wherever we hold ourselves to the sky, Priscilla, time is a companion, and we ain't anything but idle. He grunted, exhaling the mix of root and poppy. He slid under the purple darkness of the poppy. He needed more of garum in his diet. He grazed his eyes over Priscilla's body. That Catalina, that red skin, that red kin from another mother born of the wind-swept plains in Spain. What a gift to him from the Levantine scorn. Her eyes didn't seem ruddy, only expectant. Then the news, wafting through his consciousness. Dina Perry, distress, a fight. Agita, across the camp. Well, he should have known, lessening herself to older men. Your sister, the sister you didn't have any balls for? The hovel was in the company of the Cappadocians, and the loving settled peace and the oblivion the happy poppy brought, but they were quite fond of their martial past. Upon the rack in the tent was a falchion, a glorified meat cleaver. Do you have the balls now, boy of Capilio? They're putting on Dina Pera with more than their spiked horns but anger. She got more than they bargained for, they say. You say, knowing better, she's been at the end of something 6 straight. She won't have it. To play devil's advocate, you remember when that Levantine would cause trouble with her old man if she wouldn't have it? Do you remember long nights consoling her, telling her that's never the way? But this rickety maid doesn't belong to the betrothed, and you're not a sentry, but a man. This spat of cats is riotous discord. What would be the answer of the royal of bullish sport that bruised from her ribs from roughhousing as a child? Her distress means something dire from a steadfast rock of a girl. She's strong. They're giving her trouble, he seethed. A wise shepherd doesn't skin the fatted lamb. She wanted him to help. She was calling for him. His body bristles to action. Gleaming on the rack is as cute as the falchion of some gleaming iron. He takes the falchion from the rack to protest. It's theirs. Who is he to steal it? And what if he to give it back if the bloody work is done? He places it back straight in his jerkin, white as the girl before him, in the sheets bathed in shadows, and tightens his fist with his pulio and his slash. Carpelia's boy has no reason to be armed in the camp of his fathers. Those in the camp have no knowledge of squats before the relentless kicks and knees to the back, gutting men with fists, and fists not being enough, and cats on him releasing him breasts, a trio surrounding a raptor before a raptor striking a windpipe, and only one needed. Carpelia's centurion looking part of fragility, offering the window to tickle the man's canal. By the end of his disgrace, Joanna's girl would wish she would tickle his throat with her hair. He stalked across the camp that seemed deathly quiet until he saw his young girl. His men would depart once the rockets had settled. Kiddo, I know, but they're crazy, Dina Pera called. For such a slight man, he had large hands. As a burly man in his tent where the fight had happened, he curled his dagger face inside to the forearm hidden, entered the lavish tent with so much as protest. Trosteo watched the outwelling will of the women. She would leave, if he let her, but ugly, he was persistent. At the door, now as the bitch had found her, the slit-eyed brother of the fist of the South Oricus, and the Hibernian, the border Cabelia. She's leaving with me, he railed, drugged a stumbling buffoon. But she wanted to leave. The tent was alight with the orange glow. Cato carried no weapon but his white fist and curled bangs. Ugly had a whirling sword in his hand. How dare you? That is my sister, Cato said. She pleaded for peace. She pleaded to go. She left, a banshee, into the open. She would attract the gods. She did not like being taken advantage of. She had pretty boys that she called friends, but Cato trusted when things were taken far and too gripping. Ugly told Cato to leave, which he did. His eyes dropped white as his blanched face, embarrassed that he had failed his honor, and the clowning abased, with his hurtling steps that could not bear the weight of his pride. Kid, do you want to die? Ugly said, poising his sword. I'll kill you. It was marked with some etching of a colt from the hilt from the forehead of Neapolis. He was drunk, and the blade was in to pierce the young man's heart. Cato had seen all he needed to. Ugly had the stance of men who ask questions rhetorical from his whip. The boy could tell by the edgy eyes of the man they had no problem for the demeanor that he had outranked. Cato did not. "I see you make a fist. You better not miss when you aim for the throne, for the crown," Bancho said. So he pondered to the exit of the guild tank, but Ugly dropped his swaggered sword to his hip, and there was no longer any reason to die to amend the injuries of his friend instead. So the blade whipped from its tearling scabbard and held to Ugly's neck. By entering the deathlock with someone scared, immunity was, by rule, cast aside. A king may as well tell his chamberlain he didn't believe in God. The man with the brutish face likely knew that the young man was a liability to Carpilio, that was an unstable owner in a fist fight, and that she should never bring a knife to a sword fight, and sadly he was trespassing, so he was with his rights to defend himself, and he was also obliged to listen to the owner of the campsite's command. "And let's see if you're honest." Trustillo pounced forward and struck Bancho. It was his throne. What Ugly didn't know is that Trustillo's sister was the sentimental girl on the banks of the river, hopelessly enamored of Jerkins, and that they had been conducting a 2-month affair. There were little witnesses, none indebted to Ugly. That Roman protected by the guard. No one lifted a finger. There was silence as Claudio rose stricken and wheeled to get away. Cato, not wavering from his nerve, Ugly rose from his seat, shaking, wounded, and ran to the farther enclave of the tent, this one far with the riches that Trustillo could seize. Cato had stirred from his bloodlust and pursued with his punching dagger in his fist. It was a glowing menagerie of stone spaces and gold, of one which caught his eye from the silver screen caught from the gamblers. But Cato was there to end any threat, and he lunged. Bancho struggled, but a raptor had seen more than his twisted brother who had crossed him at the brambles. A frantic slap, then the sinking. "Jesus of Nazareth, stop that," Cato whispered. He ripped above his clavicle, finishing Trustillo's work. He didn't wait to see the struggle of life played out, and he left, not daring to stare long at any in attendance. The drained, shirtless man had threatened him. Not a strong man, not a man worthy of boasting, but a shirking, wounded beast that had died to debase a woman. The woman of the man that had gambled with rakish brutality and guile. The brother of the fist carried weight, the brother of Carpilio carried weight, and a sword-waving, slinging loud predator who wanted to remain in control. He carried nothing but his twitching frame. The malaise that had dissected the young man turned to fear. There was no stumbling hurt escape. There were no more chambers to flee. This was the last of the enclave, between a wall of intent and piercing intensity, and when it was finished, the air that was left of the vesicles of Ugly, he would be returned to Cato outside, where freedom and fresh air awaited. He had a birthday, he had parents, perhaps siblings, and he would never return to them. Cato would breathe deeply on the birthday and honor his dead, even if that disrespect conjured a man-wolfing devil in the red skies above. Cato, the ghost, did not leave trembling. Rather, he left stronger than when he had entered. He drank deeply from the heart of the alpha man Baboon. His sister had seen nothing of his sins. The guard of Adius's camp arrived, as he had predicted. "That little satyr has transgressed upon our dwelling. I have done nothing wrong," Trustillo lorded the guard, who confronted Cato, who has left his horse to a pail. The young man held up his red hands. "This little satyr has drank enough and seen enough and will be going home. This little satyr has danced enough. Dinapera, follow me to our home on the river." The strong, curl-headed bull replied, his flesh as pale as his jerkin by then. "Do you mean to cast uproar upon this Scythian? Do you mean to bear witness for this girl against him?" the guard demanded. It was clever, Trustillo conceded. The girl had called for aid and had been answered officially, but the first answer of her friend was unbeknownst to the responder. Cato thought, "Do you mean to drop an angel in hell and bet on the results?" "I do not. I have seen nothing. I am too sunken to ride my horse Demetrius. I will walk away," replied the boy. This was a problem. Blood had a way of spurting forth from his edge, covering any assailant to his guilty wrists. The guard did not demand further, only looked to dispute, and Cato slunk into the night. It was Trustillo's tent. He had afforded the solidus given back to him to Trustillo. It may have occurred to the guard, if he was not so preoccupied by keeping the peace, that perhaps something was missing from all that was brought to barter with the Vandal. And so it was that Trustillo imparted more fighting men to Galareth and Sagittarius for the hefty price that had been brought where he was staying. Galareth, aye. Somewhere by dawn an egg could be cooked on Bancho's bald cranium. Cato would be wringing his hands and washing his blade. There was no throne to offend, and the king was dead, a heap of riches at his feet. The boy went back to his studies, and it had always assumed they had sunk the man in the Marachia. Trustillo knew criminals always made assumptions. The man had assumed he was guarded. I was thinking to myself, you're famous on Twitter. I'm famous on Pornhub. You've been famous since 2003 on A&E. Chapter 6, The Battle of Rimini. Throstill, a man of strong exclamations, told us plainly, with no exaggeration, that his master Adius was going to be removed from power as consul by the Count Bonifacius. His master would rather die than surrender his command that he had worked so hard for. Like a wounded animal, it was at this time he was most dangerous, and the magister knew that, and would try to stop him from reaching Ravenna and demanding the accolades for a victorious army in Gaul and Rhaetia. There would be civil strife, but it would be hopefully ended in one battle, or before it began with an assassin's blade. Our belongings were secured, and we sought audience with the consul. If there was to be civil war, we wanted to know that we were dead set on his side. This was denied, however. Thrasyro was impressed that we had made a dangerous escape and crossed Bonifacius, promised us anonymity and the right to settle in Gaul at Augusta Trevorum after we fought on horseback. He gave us 4 soldiers for each of the echelon of a crew, 8 to a Sagittarius, and pale horses to ride, each with lances comitatus. As the final destination on the Via Flaminia, there is no way for Aetius' forces to enter Ravenna but through the city of Rimini, branching south. We soon saw the need for pale horses, as white scarf, tunics, and chlamyses were distributed to every soldier to distinguish them from the red and gold of Bonifacius' army, which had been endorsed by Gallia Placidia. The red banners held the eagle and the crucis of the west, while ours only displayed the crucis on a white or grey field. This crucis was called the Chi-Rho, a key and a cross. Out of all of our men of arms, only one Vexillium was given the red and gold to wear, a flanking contingent that would grow in the field in his effort to break this General Comus's horsemen. These were the men whose past had been obscured, who had fallen out of public record for a time after friendship with Bonifacius, so they had been concealed in the low countryside where they might be mistaken for reinforcements clamoring to join Bonifacius' force. The newly inaugurated church on the grounds of the city had been founded by the regent, San Stefano, and Bonifacius' troops did not hesitate to quarter themselves within its gardens and grounds. The monks of St. Stephen, first martyr of the Christian faith who had been stored in orders by the Sanhedrin at the dawn of the empire, read the rites of the Christ to the armies of Bonifacius, who was favored for their matron Gallia Placidia, and thus expected to triumph as it was God's will. Only after the rebels were dead would we be given the same blessings of good tidings to the afterlife. The proud steeds were all there, the pale and speckled, brindled and black. There were the Visigothic Bucellaria of the Count, and the Hun in their black sacks and furs of clothing, having almost sallow skin and furrows for eyes. Their hats held feathers, and their arms held hawks. All these men had come to contest what the consul should lead his army, his white assembly. Why lead an army if you are no longer a militum but a consul? Surely you can take a horse and not an army, said the regent. Bonifacius' envoys asked Aetius' army to cross the fields near Rimini. He was a consul, but consuls could be deposed, and generals only called back with their armies. If a consul was going to be deposed, and Bonifacius had not to install a dynasty or a military control under his son Sebastianus, that would eclipse Valentinian himself and return to the regent's call and her removal of the command from himself. And why disarm me if you did not seek my arrest and total dominion over Rome's army, if you did not seek your Visigothic dynasty to supplant Valentinian's majority? Was Aetius' reply. Military tradition was part of this man's identity, a proud Roman heritage, and he would work in the clerk's office as he had always done to command, dying in the saddle if he had to. This far from the regent's misgivings, he had said to lead his army in the name of Gallia Placidia to keep the military from growing too centralized. Besides, the regent grudgingly to Bonifacius' diplomat, the men who served him from the north did not wish to serve another leader in combat that had served him through all his Gallic campaigns. Bonifacius was a stranger from an exotic land to them. The day was bright. Adversaries in the constance of mist and darkness had rarely the opportunity to see ourselves so clearly. It shone over the citrus trees and the white marble of the San Stefano church. The village showed vanilla and tan in the summer light. Finally, the two generals rode out to meet each other. Bonifacius' black hair was matted with gray streaks under his Sirmian-style bejeweled helms, and the thick beard of purest diamond had grown bushy under his rotted teeth from sea travel, and above the fine golden brooch and bib and his neck. It was hard to recognize the man from the young governor who had once flayed me at Hippo Regius. Power corrupted not only men's souls, but their appearance. Aetius, despite his age, was the younger man in this equation. The high command finds you remiss from orders and your men remiss from the right army. Have them walk over to the right team and all's forgotten. I respect your career leading legions and honor your post, Bonifacius said out his arms in embrace. I, Aetius, consul, answers to the Empress Regent, a widow in her own right, not a man who would make widows of his supposed men before they return to their homes, heroes from campaigning in the north against the Visigoths, your own midges, the Bacauti, your own mercenaries. They deserve triumph, dignity, not fatherless children. Alas, the Huns you've drug into your camp are not welcome in the fair city of Ravenna, nor ever will be. As for the Gallic army, any woman who marries a man who brings sword against the regent and magister and values a disgraced man over the duty deserves nothing at all. Trust me, your men want civil war. They'll have themselves sword tomorrow, if not thrown in pits. With San Stefano as my witness, I say avoid this bloodshed for your foolish pride, Bonifacius said, tearing into a lemon with his feral-looking teeth. My ego extends to the survivors. Your wife Pelagia will be treated well in your absence, and your son Sebastianus kept alive, but without the deserts you feel he deserves over Valentinian, Bonifacius sneered. He spat his lemon, curling the rinds from his teeth and with flicking fingers. Do not speak of me, of the widow you hope to create, the Count answered, dropping his arms angrily. We have much in common, and we have known each other for many years. I hope to make a wife, should her husband so foolish as to maltreat the West veterans. It will heal the wounds of this country, Aetius replied. And we have nothing to speak of. Your christened son, Capilla, will do to step over as a thieves' quarter. Remember that well, if you do not run for the northern hills now. Sebastianus spoke up then, seated on his horse next to his father as he turned to leave. May it be done by my own hand. I have no envy for this young emperor, as you say, but excess of spite for this greedy old bull. He turned on his horse in the assembly of Pugalaria. Those Visigoths left, ready for war. With any hope of Aetius being dissuaded from his path to recall of Ravenna, Bonifacius' army turned sour, and the visitors were allowed from either camp over to each other for the next 2 days. It was a clear day when the tensions turned to aggressive and the beating of the drums began for the golden red camp of the Count, pounding, whipping the men into the ranks of parade and to field to get a bid for Aetius' force to disperse. Horns of protest rode out from the Flavian camp, only to turn in ceremony, as Aetius came forth on his horse and rallied the men to their ground and the men that would not march until Ravenna was clear. And all of their marching from the north had left their feet calloused and blistered, and Aetius assured him it would be more than a stroll, no more than a stroll to the capital after the obstacle of power, hungry general from Africa, was removed. The shouts of Centuria leveled their men into great lines upon the field where they crashed against their bucklers and shields with spears before a long-faced Bonifacius sent his Bucalaria to harass them with pilum and javelins arranged from horseback. They screamed for the rebels to leave the field and fear for their lives, some purposely failing short with their throws to avoid bloodshed, but were answered by the guttural curses of the Huns and Alemanni in Aetius' army, who only grew more grave and came forward in 2 strafing formations of horses, each led by a diamond. The horsemen at the tips of the diamond carried nets and lassos, and they hurled these at the lithe legs of the horses that skirmished past, kicking up the dirt. With all pretense of passive aggressive had faded from the battle, and then began, these ropes and nets would be used to tear Roman infantry limb from limb on the battlefield. And hidden amidst all this was a single vexilla of traitors, vagabonds, cutthroats, that would be used as heavy horsemen if victorious, would give noble status and freedom in some cases. I was right at home among them. Sagittarius was with those who were called to wear the enemy colors to a hostile audience, the former leader himself. I should have been with him. but it was deemed suicide mission, and I wanted a future with Caesarea and myself in Gaul. Aetius had doubted Gallia Placidia's commitment to her new Magister Militum, despite their fraught past, and unknown to him, the full strength of the Western army was behind Magister Bonifacius. Behind the villas in the new church and the orchards were an untold number of supporting troops that had been given a ruse that Ravenna itself was under threat from Aetius, and that they would be called at a moment's notice to scatter the fray and claim the field for the Magister. The civil war would be over before it started. Aetius ordered his front lines to move past the bridge to swarm over it, but the moment they were seen approaching Rimini, the Grand Army crossed the river, flowing into position and holding with their shields outstretched. Some bore from the black lines, keeping them balanced above their heads to turn away the swift and feared Hunnic arrows. And those arrows came in a hail, but not before the men of the Magister floated and held steadfast, guarding the bridge, ready for any onslaught. Aetius ordered the front lines to take the bridge and sent scouts to the southeast looking for any flanking force. These scouts would never return, pinioned on their horses by longbow snipers. Perhaps Aetius had been away from Italy for too long and forgotten the maze of hills and had trapped an invader far from the road so singular and purposeful to this the lower reaches of the Marechia. The Magister's levies had rose from villages all around and taken position from their local principes, who each told them not to take the battle until Aetius had fully committed to a fight. The red drip and stains on our uniform were telling within hours, and our vexillion enraged to take the river and secure the bridge, which we're having success in doing. The trampling hoofs of the horses kicked mud and blood in my eyes, traipsing on the shield and cadaver alike. I've tried not to be a vulture, as I had always been in battle, and only struck the men who struck at me, but when I did so with the ferocity of a man fighting for his own freedom, slashing with my cavalry sword and dispatching with my lance to my steed as our horses waded through the carnage. Lycurgus was spearing men like fish, an adept with the spear without monastic reservations that had always been instilled in me. Hunting lancers crashed into our number, throwing snares and ropes that tore off arms, pulling men screaming through the mud, mangled bodies trapped by lassos. And then the lassos were brought to bear by a second charge that sight through the Magister's numbers protecting the bridge. My horse took an arrow from our own Huns, and I realized the ringing Parthian circle of Hunnic horsemen were being ordered to fire on our own position to pepper the numerically superior Magister's force. The Count was on our hill, and he has ordered his runners to tell the ranks to abandon the bridge and make a retreat to the high ground. And there on the high ground were the elite soldiers of Bonifacius, the Bulgari with their crossbows on horseback, ready to let rip into our ranks as we made a desperate run to charge for them. The first lines fell stricken into little white and red piles immediately, and the smart waded back from the advancing line. Aetius made his way cautiously forward and placed his ring of guards around the entrance to the bridge. But then, on the horizon, a force of his scouts is never reported, reinforcements from the rear that had forded the river in the early hours of the fight. Aetius called all of his reserves into the bridge to meet the second force, and found that his advance was divided and cut off from the main army, being surrounded by the levies that had risen from the surrounding towns to the road of Rimini, which had no love of the veterans, starved for comforts of civilization, or the barbarians they had brought with them. The waters of the lower bank of the Marechia were full with the drowning, fleeing arrows and javelin and terrified horses that attempted to cross. Bloated bodies already rose in the suds of the river. Soon we were being stricken down in great numbers, and the edges of our advance were being cut up before the hill before the Bulgari perched. Magister Bonifacius let his compass guard off with the high sloping hill and roared the charge down from its swordsmen who made the edge of the leads could not reload and made fight with cavalry swords against long swords and spears. His eyes gleamed as if he was 10 years younger, and he saw another riding force take the initiative and join him, cutting off the advance short. He had not ordered, but he was welcome that his loyal had joined him in this moment of triumph. He felt some remorse that he could be killing his wife to Pelagia's friend today. With the destruction of his army, he was softened by the man's boast to care for him when the rightful Magister was gone. There were a heavy horse they rode upon, with coats of chainmail ornament in their saddles and coats, and when they crashed against the infant, they broke as quickly as their frayed nerves, scatterbrained as they fled, avoiding anything remotely like the crashing waves of horses they had just been rode over with. The lances and cavalry swords left a trail of white-clad bodies bleeding in the green grass amidst the lemon trees and rotting fruit of the orchids. Adius' advance was broken, and all he had to do was lead an orderly retreat from the bridge, perhaps to fight another day. But he would have to break through the light regiments that surrounded him to do this, and Bonifacius had time to tighten the noose around him with his victory on the outskirts of Rimini. The unexpected happened. Onagers, catapults with a kick in the ass that could hurl great burdens of rocks, bees, and naphtha, began unloading, hurling rocks, hornets' nests into the rank of the dying and abandoned past the bridge. The magistrate had been very clear: whoever let an arrow shot hit the bridge would be whipped. Panic and confusion caused against Adius, he couldn't quite gather his bearings, nonetheless give clear orders. It was immense. His son Sebastianus asked Bonifacius, who was skewering an ant of a soldier in the dirt. "Perhaps he's learned his lesson. I figure Gallia Placidia will want him alive. Better to serve in heaven than the reign in cell, that mangled oak. He's learned his lesson in loyalty. The solidarity of Italy was too strong for him and undesirable, so he's broken back from the hell of the north. Our levies can end this one lesson for all in all. I'm concerned, but we the victors need only congratulate each other's in unity." He rode forward on his horse to a lone rider. The battle was still winding around on the hill around him, and the sun gleamed down from the gleaming heart of the victorious charge. It was the glorious Roman commanders dreamed of, so many years now lost in the waning of the West. He pointed to the lone rider who aided in the charge fording the river, and sat aloof on his horse, his visor low. "That man, for example, Sagittarius. He has passed the test of loyalty. Adius could not. If Adius had disbanded and left the defense of the north to me, he'd be rewarded with titles and his servant son. He remained Hyperides to guard our temporary evacuation from the tide of the Vandals. He fought to the end for us, and now rejoined us in victory. Men like Sagittarius are the victors for today. To the loyal, then," Sebastianus murmured, drinking deeply from his water flask, exhausted. Sagittarius raised his hand in salute and urged his horse to the dying Freddy at the general's side, promptly kicking his lance deeply in Bonifacius' side to the best angle he could find with his lance, and whipping his horse to a foaming pace back to the bridge and Adius. Sebastianus cried out in rage and dismounted from his horse to the fallen weazened father, whose breastplate had not been pierced, only crushed in, damaging his vitals in a bruising blow. The wolf in sheep's clothing could not ensure the general's death, only his flight, and the other disguised horses clashed with the Bucellari, fighting to escape the rear. Thorstilo watched the defeat of the army and the man he loved so much, and fought alongside with Attila, stopping only to drive off those pursuing them with their horses. It was becoming a slaughter. To his own lights, the ruse of using a soldier in the magistrate's uniform had failed, and this was the end of the contest. He would serve with his master until the end, but Bonifacius had been decisive today, and all ours on our side had underestimated the springback of levies that could be drawn from the heart of Italy. Trostilo dared glance back to the hill, where he saw several disguised horsemen, bound by hands on their knees. "You're snakes, Flavius Aetius!" Sebastianus shouted above the scenes of slaughter on the bridge. The general's son was readying a cleaving sword. All soldiers hated archers, but not as much as subterfuge during a battle. Trostilo watched their heads severed from their shoulders one by one, lastly Sagittarius. He shouted, "Sagittarius, the trampled snake smiles," and then clenched his eyes shut before his neck sprung a leak, strapped straight through the back of the neck. His corpse was kicked down the hill by the Bucellari. I, Guile Arrhythmia, the sign of the cross, and the sight of my dead comrade, and crushing loss stung me more than the salt and tears in my eyes. That was until a rider who had been with the capture told Trostilo that the riders had severely injured Bonifacius, and he might be dead already. Trostilo and Attila spread the word like a wildfire, giving the men new purpose, not to surrender, but rather escape. The best Aetius could imagine was a disorderly retreat. All the survivors, most were fleet as their horses, and escaped the vengeful butchery at the bridge, directed by Sebastianus and Bonifacius, who was down on cover, howling for victory at Aetius' blood at the back of the lines where pure rebel survivors with no captives being taken. Aetius had few options but to flee north and secure to his friend Rua, Khan of the Huns. Those who didn't serve him would slip into obscurity in Gaul or flee with their trail, defecting back to the victors of the Battle of Rimini, as were among them, but witness to the wounding of Bonifacius and the treacherous spy of Aetius, who also servant of Carpelio, who had made him not want to discharge from his servants quite yet, and so recalled for an audience with Scarpillo at the hidden retreat of Aetius far to the north. We found each other, and not our crews had been killed in the fighting, escaping on our horses, some abandoned the fight before it started. We rode on our horses, broken to be put down after a stingy, stringent meal before, and found Thorstillo, who told us that the fortunes of the empire were not certain, depending on the severity of Bonifacius' wound. In our Ligurian mountain haunts, we prayed for the future that would include us in it. Carpelio stayed by our sides with Trostillo until word reached us that Sebastianus, enraged by his father's wounding, sought to end the conflict by use of the assassin's blade. Several killers haunted Flavius Aetius in the coming months, but since Sebastianus relied on Visigoths, who were unpopular in Rome for their piracy, it was hard for these killers to find a weak link in the general security. Carpelio was pleased with us and said a man he referred to as the Stoat had witnessed our former captain Sagittarius planting a lance in Bonifacius. It fell to his crew to be rewarded. This caused him to do a bit of paperwork and to determine our origins. When he discovered we were pirates, he kept it under tight guard. Finally, at the end of 3 months, we were awakened from our quilts and told we would be pardoned for all previous offenses, and we were now welcome in the court of Aetius. Carpelio had determined I was a good swordsman and a religious scholar, so I was to be introduced to the younger members of Aetius's household until a suitable student could be found. When we asked about the fate of Bonifacius, who had known all those years ago, Carpelio responded, "It's kept under wraps by the regent, but it's safe to say it will trouble us no longer. His son Sebastianus is the last thorn in our sides." When we learned that Sebastianus was forming an army of Visigoths to hunt us down in Italy, we fled to ride with Rua and the Huns. It was backbreaking travel through Raetia, and Caesarea told me it would settle for a quiet life in Gaul over the new status of the new danger, of no benefit to her and the rest of the crew. Still, we had the beauty of the mountains to share, which many of our men had never seen since the Alpine passes. One day in Sicily, Gaul, I rode with Thrasillo, who carried a mighty greave on one hand, so thick of leather even the talons of the blinded falcon upon his hand could not rake his arm. The bird would hunt hares for us, while the men foraged for sage and ointments, sticks for tents and berries so our gums didn't rot, while we wolfed down the raw meats and few gamey deer we could find with our hunting hunters at the elevation. Even on the run, we practiced domestication and ran rams of goats at the back of our caravan. I held my reins tightly and asked, "Any hares for tonight's feast? I wonder what we're celebrating. 4 months and one magister is replaced by a son." "There are killers sent by Sebastianus out in those mountains. They're not so quick to stymie the spits and rations with those peaks to hide them. My falcon will find the gibbs they left behind and bring them to me at pace," Trostillo answered. "He hires bounty hunters? Is that what he does?" I asked. "What would you do?" Gallia Placidia has impatience for infighting, and hiring the people she was just at war with leaves a sour and taste of Ross for Sebastianus. She's grown unpopular. Stronger is needed to assist her son, an eagle. You see those Huns, most of them serve Aetius for a piece of the pie, but when another eagle rises in the east, they'll not want equality but extortion. He has already been born, a young Khan who makes mountains tremble when he speaks, and the younger brother of Bleda, Attila. The Empress will need a man with strong ties to the land. That man will terrorize. She'll need someone to stop with martial respect to the Germanic kingdoms. Not all are enthralled to his ranks. "Maximus Petronius will certainly welcome his return," I said in sarcasm, speaking of the wealthiest man in Ravenna, a senator. "Nor Valentinian. He will need him as much as the emperor himself, but love and hate the power he wields. When you hold the Aquifere higher than yourself as an ideal, an icon, it carries more weight than yourself. A man might be tempted to throw it down and lead on his own. We have lived like this for almost 2 years off the land, riding with unforgiving Huns and staying coy and shy to strangers that might be killers, spies, or hired hands. We avoided conflict with the Visigoths and stayed far from Italy, in baited exile. Ravenna, 437. Valentinian III was already Caesar of the Western Empire and married to a lovely queen of the East, on the largest occasion Constantinople had known since Theodosius' time. His wife, called Augusta Eudocia, she had blessed him with a daughter. She was very young, named Eudocia, but good for keeping company with the other children when she wasn't attending lessons. He wanted to be keen to learn in the events she had to rule over, and she was ready for the intrigues of the court when she was older. The little bastard she was supposed to be playing with would teach her some hard realities about the nature of the barbaric world. Valentinian just told the news of the Emperor on the mainland to the son of Genseric. The Palladium in Ravenna was full of halls and busts and portraits, sculptures and arms and armor on dummies. How many of the statues' mounted had died only to wear the armor and carry the blades in life now in eternity? Valentinian wondered. There were mirrors and lounges and cafeterias and baths, all waited on by the Theodosian household. Why, your eyes, they're alight like pagan glowing gourds, Valentinian said. He was amiss that the boy was pleased to hear the Magister Militum being wounded grievously against Romania against the rebel that had fallen out of grace with his mother. My father's enemies reached the shores of Italy only to find himself Pompey of Egypt. Of course I'm delighted, the prince answered. He was surprised that this Caesar didn't replace the dying man with the ones that he bested him out in the mountains of the Huns, a true Roman who commanded Roman and barbarian respect at once. Dolly, you fight fire with fire pitch, said little Eudocia to Hunteric in her pipsqueak voice. The mere African would be on fire until they were promised to another until she came of age. Only marriage would cement what had begun in service as a hostage. Such an annoying girl, though. They were in Ravenna during the first year of the captivity of Prince Hunteric. He was sent to Italy as a signal of goodwill by Genseric as an end to hostilities. Eudocia, the 5-year-old daughter of Valentinian, had been sent to keep the boy occupied, anything to keep his mind off the territorial ambition resumed near Sardinia. He'd be sent home more than with warning. Valentinian, who was only a bit older than Hunteric at the age of 18, chided him. Magister Boniface is a very strong man. He may yet survive, and lived humbled, serving Caesar and Augusta. He was referring to himself and his wife, first cousin, married in Constantinople on the 27th of October, 437. This was the unification of the Theodosian households, the thrones of the East and the West. The entire bone of contention of the usurper Joannes, who Bonifacius and Aetius had fought alongside and against. It was a story of a phantom general. Bonifacius had died and was interred, but he was a living memory perpetuated to keep this facade of a union strong. And if not, Hunteric answered, Sebastianus will take his place, a Visigoth. Jordanus, didn't he once say you must keep your auxiliaries on the frontier, as we're stronger or we'll go too strong for those at home? Say it again and I'll kick your nuts through your throat, Valentinian said. Sebastianus is a loyal man. We wouldn't let you through the walls of his instincts if our Germanic brothers hadn't served faithfully over 100 years. You're a boy, Hunteric, our guest. You worry about your owl pellets. Valentinian waved his hand and excused him to his wife, Eudocia. While most children would whittle wooden idols and crosses and tokens, Hunteric would whittle through the waste of owls for skulls of squirrels and rats. You can learn a lot from owl pellets. Owls have been hunting vermin for aeons. The vermin are overfed with perfect incisors for eating, perfect cheeks for stowing nuts, perfect hands for running uphill. Just like you Romans. For every meal of an owl, there are 1,000 vermin that escape their talons and live on. Our scurrilous, thrifty friends are blue-blooded, just like our princess, Hunteric said. Eudocia smiled and took away his carving knife. Hunteric, your father is a mighty man for a cripple, and one day he will teach you humility. Now be a bit nicer when you're playing with our daughter, she said softly. Dolly fights fire, Eudocia said. She fights fire set by the Vessi. Exactly, Hunteric said, lest the rain fall upon your head and crack it. Do you hear me, little girl? You are unfit for marriage to keep our parents from killing each other because I'd break you in half like a string of beads. God made Christ to shelter Roman weakness, and he made Romans to break in the earth for my art and deal. Valentinian paced the palace in motion. He motioning silently, smiling to a man who picked up a dowel from the drawer. The man with the dowel entered the room. Princess, is the boy being mean? He asked. And she nodded, perplexed that a creature of refuge should be so cruel. She contented herself with her Ravenhill doll made of elven ivory. I think it's time for you to meet some of our harder, taller, bigger squirrels, Hunteric. You'll find red blood flying as it boils to your impotence. May I remind you that the Emperor was not won by Federate and not forged without Sabines. Not a coast doesn't know our blood, the man said. He cuffed him on the ear with the dowel and dragged him out of the room by his shoulder. Gallia Placidia had sent a messenger for her son, Valentinian. In another life, the young Caesar might have been an upstanding man, an Augustus, but already the playing board that made his head was all manipulations of those close to him. And his stubborn sense of independence that made him seem constantly at war with all around him except his loving wife and cousin. He was, of course, the cousin of Honorius, and for these men he was the only man. His wife were the only people who could understand the separation of the leaders from the mob. Valentinian wondered if perhaps the magistrate had finally made his mark on Aetius and exiled him, this time not from Italy, but from existence. He entered the throne room of the Palladium and bowed curtly to his mother, whose hair was the purest raven of shocks of white, tied tightly behind her head, arching eyebrows of her tan complexion. He stepped forward and offered a hastily made bouquet of flowers and herbs from his chlamys. You wanted to see me, Regent Mother? Is there anything I can do for you? Asked Valentinian. Thank you for the flowers, my son. You're going to have to get used to calling yourself Emperor, Caesar. Your majority has been made final. You will rule the West, and you will instruct this northern frontier as peace is made as the southern one. Valentinian was taken back at first, but a thin smile creased on his lips that he couldn't hide. I will approve the Visigothic army being mustered by Magister Sebastianus. It was a shame about our lost cues and red flags with the fathers. I wish I had been age of right to that. Master Sebastianus will depart for Constantinople to live with your father's family, your wife's family. He's failed in his attempts on the consular life 2 times. I've had him placed under house arrest, the Empress Regent said thinly. Valentinian's reply was shrill. And Pelagia? She'll be arrested too. You can call me Emperor, but do not ask my approval. Valentinian III protested. No, she will enter into matrimony with Flavius Aetius. Sebastianus does not want to see his mother alone. He's gathered enough strength in the north to muster another battle. When I die, I'll be known for rebellion, but it will be known as a woman who pit the Eudocian against Flavian and lost. Aetius is the strongest man in the Empire, and you will become his friend, son. You will not be known for reuniting the East and West and severing them at one time. I've just met the captive, Honaricus. He's a monstrous ingrate of bad manners. When I make peace with Genseric, now that Bonifacius is alleged is going to be buried, I will not be offering my daughter to his son. Of course not, said the regent. With Sebastianus leaving for the West, I'll need to repair our relations with Theodoric I and the Visigoths to keep our Bucularia in debt. The friend of a friend is a friend. That boy, now the Princess of Visigoth's problem. You're to send him home to Carthage at once. Valentinian had a coronation to perform for, and offers to make a treaty with Genseric. He was thankful for his mother and wondered how long it would take until the ungrateful start showing their due respect. And Emperor, she continued, we have history, Aetius and I. No matter how powerful it becomes, he will never, ever disgrace the East or murder my child. He's a Roman and views you as the future of Romans. Let's not make him the last, Caesar. Ravenna, February 11th, 439. We were called back to Ravenna as if the battle had never transpired. We were the victors, and we looked down on the beaten ones with flame-infected feet and calloused hands, some digits lost at the frostbite of the Alps. One man's hero was another man's traitor, as we would soon learn. Carpilio introduced us to Aetius, who returned somber without the company of his Huns, many of whom had defected to Attila. Aetius had a weathered face and a fatherly tone. He extended his full apologies for the abuses of Bonifacius and the turmoil of the Vandals crossing of the Gibraltar that had led us to piracy. He told us that Carpilio now had a younger brother, the first blessing of his new marriage with Pelagia. The peace of Valentinian with Genseric would take hold soon. I went to see the baby, whose name was Gaudentius, and who was doted on by the page of Aetius called Cato, who was playing a game of gotcha-nose with him. When the baby battered away, he looked up with concern as among 10 men injuring the child of the magister. Trustilla walked straight up to the boy, who was pale as parchment, and asked him if he'd be having any children soon. "No," replied the boy, "but I hear Dina Perra is with child." "I wouldn't expect anyone else," Trustilla countered. "Raiders like yourself. I wouldn't know. I don't get out too much." She tried to tell me, I think, but my eyes were broken squinty by the sun and I didn't recognize her, meagerly offered the squire Cato. Trustilla answered to him, "I do have children. You're not ready. You've ever heard a wild pup call for help, a crocodile peep, or when they start cooing. You won't have it in you knowing what the cute little ones are capable of in but a few years." "I do as well," Centuria Trustilla. "Left a boy behind in Africa," I answered. "This one doesn't get out much. Give me the time and I'll show him the wonders of the Word and the Savior before he dies to a cobweb." "That's what I need to speak to you about. You're to teach this one how to fight when he's not sucking on his quill pen. But you say of a boy in Africa, just as well, with Hunter being sent home as a hostage, we'll need demonstrations of our cooperation and continue with meaningful hostages. You will rejoin your countrymen." His armed companions, with their swords tied to their back like bunches of hair, stood nearby. These men were called the Qui Dominus Nostri Occupati Milita, men who served the court at arms. "A pleasure to meet you, soldier. I'm Decimus Phanius Cato. I pray to find your son back home. My bronco, Demetrius Staple, was put to the torch on the river after the battle. Losing an animal you cared for and taught teaches a little about the lesson of loss. There's a few pen strokes I could teach you when it's not sword strokes. I look forward to our correspondence on the mainland." I answered and nodded my head. "This one is from the Isle of Valentinian, now forsakes," Trostio said. "His brother, he breaks jaws and is known in the slums as an enforcer who runs with wolves like Urgus, but is an inward lamb. I'm told the weaker of the two. But even the weaker of the two gets some chip off the block. I hear he wailed onto his cell and says way home from lessons and gave him such a lesson. Why, the daughter of Johannes herself applauded him and offered him respect. You believe that? Euphemia, she's my daisy. There have been few times I've been more proud when I got her praise." Cato bowed his head. "But not for long. You're not as much for good for bowing your head," Trustio answered coldly. "But with the sword I ask, I need to carry at least one to bring it to arms at service." "They say he stabbed his brother once. He has a history of violence. All the Gothams call him Decimus Phanius Gato, because he takes the breath from his victims in the seminary with him. We're trying to subdue those tendencies that have no place in the scholarly walk." Trustio shook his head. "He stabbed his brother with a knife?" I asked. With a pen, the boy offered up, his eyes narrowing in on Trustio for breaking the lie. "Then we'll focus on the less dangerous tests first. I have a lesson or two to teach in the forgotten tongues." Our tutorship would continue in Ravenna. However, by October 19th, Genseric would have different plans, knowing that each scrap from a lasting peace would endure forever in such far locales. So under the cover of spies within the city who raised the gates, Carthage fell without violence to Genseric in October, and now Valentinian was sure to make up his mind. It had been forced by the Vandal King, who was now recognized as Lord of Byzacena, and he had placed his new capital at Carthage, where the skies burnt red of the sunken fleet of Aspar that remained. Now, with no formal navy to contest them, the Mare Africa was Vandalorum, and Sicily and Sardinia were at the mercy of the navies of Genseric. So on October 19th, a new arrival to the port of Carthage, where I would be given an audience by Genseric later that month, I sat on the edge of harbor and watched the last of the dying burning ships, in anticipation of the Epiphany in January. I met with two young girls, one my age, and rode with them to the Gemmi Thermony, where our story had begun. For my homecoming, I wanted to watch the main event. A hometown prostitute fillet a zebra and take the beast inside her. The girls clearly looked interested in older men, none as pale or young as I. Rather the sorts that offered me opium indica when I was their age, and after skipping rocks and empty bottles of wine on the edge of the abyss, it was confided to me that the man and one of these women had broken their honesty and cheated back in Italy. So in the spirit of good sport, not entirely unsuspicious that they could be the Loafus's of Bonifacius, I brought them onto the sector which they enjoyed, and although I had no solidus for wine, they kissed passionately in the lounge, and I was happy that, if, for these sisters' love, they would have each other. So lost in the embrace, they did not even notice the zebra ejaculating to the prostitute. I imagined no centaurs would be born, and had a sip of water. From the debauchery around me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with this harmless fun, so long as they returned the long miles home without being robbed. I asked if I was the caliber of the performers they had agreed to see, and by then I was too far hampered by the grandiosity of the meeting later that night, so the ashen youth did do, and didn't want to be gratuitous. They approved of my flaccid proportions, saying that I was too thick to put in their throats and that I was fat, and I left the Gemini Therma, saying something about a jackass with a candy whore is just the underside of any workhorse, they said, and that was the truth. I was recalled from the Gemini Thermae as a run to the warlords of Genseric and Carthage in the seasonless winter of 439. The Rhodus was fraught with the presence of the Roman Vandals who were searching for the unfaithful of the Latin faith. Genseric ushered in a period of tolerance, but still many nobles suffered and transferred control from Roman under Pachacdeus to Vandal under Pachacdeus. And Genseric already knew my situation before I was summoned. The Vandal soldiers played cruel games with the masters who refused to marry their slaves, and the slaves who refused to marry their masters. An envoy of Pachacdeus, Paulus, said, "I've heard of your merrymaking in the Gemini, and allow me to say whatever floats your boat, it's all right." He admonished me. I knew the way men were seduced into complacency for offenses later to be brought into a purge. No, it's not all right, Paulus. Party tricks are all fine until someone loses an eye. As for me, I'd rather not have my boat sunk by Slepiphus, I said, warning him to keep his hands off me. It was the time in which we lived. High King Genseric and his rival Bonifacius was believed in soldier walks such as Heldica, and monastic walks such as I in the educated part of my life to be anointed as High King of God himself, and a welcoming countenance given a reign over Carthage and a flash fire. The sanctity of his lineage was something literally believed, and as so not to be trifled with. I had committed a cardinal sin in Heldica's eyes by not immediately sacrificing my career to defend against them, the aggressors. Paulus invited me to a banquet where he would be arraigning the peace that was to last between Rome and Italy and the kingdom of the Vandals. "Why did you not serve with us at Colomba?" Paulus asked. "From the very oath-making we are now held in contempt of," I answered. We feasted in the great hall with Caesarea at my side. Caesarea had kept a dagger beneath her dress along her shin. She told me simply she would not allow her lord to deliver me in exchange for peace to these loyalists remaining for Bonifacius' regime. Uncharacteristically dumber than words, she would have doomed both of us through any violence, but passions were high. The queen thanked me for the bravery of Sagittarius, who had restored good relations with her and her husband, and assured me that I had done the right thing in not allowing my crew to stay behind and be butchered by their kin. Genseric and I were watching the smallest child, Galareth, and Hunneric play before the great hearth fires and the mantles of slate that held the crowd in the helms of the high-born magistrates of the former empire, and I wasn't sure if my lord had decided to turn me over to the vengeful factions of Bonifacius or the Arian Inquest yet. He began speaking to Lentz at how I could redeem myself. "So you are pirates who became soldiers to defy me and serve me in foreign lands." He placed his arm and hand in mine, speaking to me, giving a smile to Caesarea to tell her that her fears were for naught. "You have spared my relations in my kingdom, and the Emperor of Valentinian great scorn. The Romans opposed to Pachacdeus want you turned over to them. The priests want you prosecuted for being a disciple of Augustine in your exile there," Genseric said. "How much do they ask if I forfeit my life?" I asked warily. "Too much. I've showered Dracontius with gifts just to arraign this meeting. It will take even more to ensure others' silence in the religious front. Trustila will pay for my freedom as best he can. I am his servant still, though I serve you, great king. Their demands are gluttonous as an eagle fat ripe for slaughter across the sea that returned you to me." Genseric waved his finger to Caesarea, making the signal of a dagger with his twitching finger. "I've never been able to adequately thank you for your service in defying Bonifacius' defenders of the boatyard or your captain, Sagittarius, maiming him mortally," he continued. "I will not be exchanged in. Then I must serve Carthage's sailor, and honestly, as any of the faith you condemn. I will pay for the price of the bounty given to my crew by Aetius." "Heavens, no, Red Arms. I'd never estrange Trustila and the man who calls himself Magister Aetius, nor betray you. Not a simple man, but a man of Christ. Speaking of which, The magistrate reports of the Huns growing restless and our peace being made more urgent to the northern defense, more urgent, sealed by the marriage of my ambitious son to the daughter of Theodoric I, king of Visigoths. Genseric continued speaking. He had grown older and more dignified, though the loss of his legs used being master of combat. His voice was deeper and held more weight. Christ favors you, my son. The richest man in Africa has joined my ascension and wants to assure you that you serve him in the end. He wants you to remember it. My eternal thanks, Redney of Vandal, I said humbly. Good. Now do me another favor and thank me by playing along. Dracontius must be appeased your disloyalty to signing contract with the Romans, and I must appear to satisfy my church and devout son. Just a minute, Genseric, I edged in, but he had already stood. He handed a loop of brambles with a few thorns as if it was a necklace. Christ, he's going to strangle me, I thought. I would like to propose a toast. The man who sits me has saved his own life, which would have been given for a worthy vanquished rival. He's transgressed against a time-honored code to honor the blood of Bonifacius in his Roman region and broken the heart of his dame by leading the death of his master at Rimini. So I speak to you all today as witnesses, for the price of betrayal would be betrayed that he's not trespassing under needed control. This man will wear an example of Iscariot, a milestone of thorns from a weeping tree, to wear around his neck like a noose of Judas. The queen gave a toothless smile and placed her hands down, looking down, after waving her hand to assure me that no harm was intended upon me. But it scraped and burned upon my sea-withered neck already, a milestone around my neck for as long as I served the Vandal King. Paulus approached me as I slunk back into the company of Caesarea and demanded, "Taking 2 Roman girls to watch a girl blow a zebra? How pious of you, our resident Judas." "That will not be soon forgotten." "A stone's throw from your prior song, blue of the proceedings. When I'm back home with my kinsmen, I want to enjoy myself. I'm not the highlight of their year, those girls. I'm not the highlight of their autumn, and I must disagree. Those who worship the rising sun, all things fade into the night." Paulus grabbed me by the necklace of thorns and spat, "Nicene hypocrite," before pushing me away. I gathered Lycurgus from the brothels near the Gemini, and by that time he had gathered a grapefruit-sized stain upon his tunic from all the girls he had visited. He rode our camels to the Palm Olive with Caesarea. The place was dilapidated, our once fine parlor crumbled into seals on the floor. All the marble had been carried off years ago, and the games that played there were ransacked as well. There were just a few empty gallons of liquor, which the spider tasted first for signs of arsenic to dissuade squatters and looters. Caesarea kept a candelabra of jasmine, incense to kill the pungent aroma of mold. When we put the spider away for knitting, that cloak he had been working on all these years and never left his bed, and gave him a lyre to play. "Take it off," Caesarea said to me, motioning to the ring of thorns around my neck, which had pricked me for walking and dancing, leaving scratching lines and blood down my chest. "I'm afraid that would be cheating." I wagged a finger at her and let my head hang back in shame. She kissed the streaks of blood now over my chest. "Not now, Caesarea," I said. "You're so whipped you don't know you're the last man with the dick here. Maybe if you'd been braver at Rimini, Sagittarius could comfort me while you wallow on your Cretan's oats." "What are you going to do, Gallereth? Cut your hair into a bowl where your fierce mane had once been? Wear a rope around your waist where that soaring, dangling beast had once been?" "What's the worst thing I could say?" I said. "I have it in me to kill an armed man in disguise after the lessons of the priest. Johannes isn't hunting for us. He won't sodomize you and throw in just when he learns of my reservation to chase him off again. I want you tender and you want me raw. I was fighting our future in Gaul. At Rimini, our safety and obscurity. Tomorrow I'll travel to Hippo and see my son. I've taken pity for another one in Ravenna." I tried to kiss her and attempted to press forward. She rebuffed me. "You coward, couldn't even kill to save your captain's sons being orphans, and now run off to the muling whose mother wanted you dead," she whispered. I pressed forward and told her that I loved her. She snapped back the ringlet around my neck so tightly I thought it would carve my throat out. I grabbed my throat in pain and watched the few flecks of blood on our old board table as our blankets and sleeping bags full of wool were brought into Gardas from the desert cold. "Take it off, Gallereth." She turned and rose, mussing the head of the spider as she mussed mine when I was a boy so many years ago, and shouted, "Your cock's going to be sore tonight, Lycurgus. Devil may care." She left for the back rooms of the pilot where Lycurgus was eating his sup. I could write a page in Aetius's court and teach him the language Caesarea had used to communicate with all these years. I looked down at my chest for Caesarea's nails. It rung the necklace. around my neck, and written my caked blood smeared across his chest was the sign of a heart upon my very heart. That and the symbol for captain. I opened a bag of barley and mixed it with the soup that one of the crew had brought from the pot at the table. I drank my fill of the soup, which was the day's cash cut into bits of gruel for the entire crew, making my innards warm, and fell back onto the hard, cracked floor, slipping into unconsciousness at our old home. I filtered out cursing of Caesarea and Lycurgus directed towards me. Because it's a fallacy, God would judge him for breaking Genseric's bond. But there's no way to judge him on the stars, so he's a fool, Lycurgus argued and laughed. I filtered out the leer the spider played, and I filtered out the crew tonight, demanding their night's meals. One thing I didn't filter out and nodded weakly at, slipping into unconsciousness, was the spider, leaving the leer and taking our weapons, which were in a great sling of leather, and burying them under the sand as the raucous party continued, and I finally slept. Aetius, Heraclius, Maximus, and Valentinian. The following years were a time of tragedy and terror for the West Empire, times of relative peace and prosperity brought by the omens of the Vandal Kingdom in Eastern Roman Empire. In the most far-fetched of coincidences, Pulcheria, sister of the late Eastern Emperor Theodosius II, had made Marcian, of all people, consort. The relationship was not sexual, and without children, this made Marcian ascend to the position of emperor, fulfilling the omen of the ravens Genseric had had. Genseric saw the one who attended to its barrenness and outlasted the winter, and the Huns who would be the surviving raven, the surviving East, while the West was destined to perish, devoured by the East. Marcian made no further concession of chests of silver to Attila, and that eagle moved on, as Drusilla had told me. Marcian made no effort to assist the Western Empire in its plight, and Genseric guessed he would keep his word concerning his kingdom. But Genseric also knew he must keep to his. One must wonder what effect Sebastianus' exile had on this. I learned that my son had gone to stay with his mother in Hippo Regius, where I was still wanted for crimes. Doing any chance of a relationship with him, I endeavored instead to make the best of my letters and page with the Roman court and tried to get him out for the taste of the world. Some things are lost to time, but for those that lived those times, they are a strange mix of myth, legend, and rumor, history often being writ by the victor. The marriage of Huneric to the daughter of Theodoric, king of the Visigoths, was arranged as promised. The court of Rome, which sought peace desperately after the capture of parts of Sardinia and Sicily, fell under the governance of Valentinian III, with his chamberlain, the eunuch Heraclius, the Primicerius Saculus Cubiculi, guiding his counsel. The story went that Heraclius viewed the power of Aetius, the new magister militum, entering his second consulship, as a device too powerful that would supersede his own in advice to the emperor. And so the third most powerful man in the empire, Petronius Maximus, who had made an impeccable career early in the West, related to the Nicias family of Liberius, decided to befriend Valentinian. As a senator, Praetorian Prefect in Italy, restorer of St. Peter's Basilica, and the richest man in Rome, he had led a storied life, but none was more peculiar to the elder's statements than his young, beautiful, and chaste wife, Lucina, who he loved dearly. He was the most honored man in Rome other than Valentinian, and Valentinian liked to assert his dominance, and he often felt overshadowed by Aetius. One day, I'm told, there was a game at the Blue with Greens at a race team that participated at the Hippodrome, and Maximus had gambled a large sum of money for a side victory in the match. His side lost, and he found himself indebted to the Emperor Valentinian himself. As a sign of collateral and goodwill, he made good on the debt and trusted his golden Nicias family signet ring to a Valentinian III to hold on to. Now, Valentinian was fond of playing with his food, watching people squirm, and having a good laugh at others' expense, so once he had possession of the ring, he sent it to the young wife of Maximus, Lucina, who intended to play a prank on by having himself appear when the missive sent with the golden ring, as called for Maximus's wife to meet with her husband. When the gorgeous wisp of a girl arrived to her husband's secret dinner planned for her, she found the table empty, but candles lit and the most exquisite delicacies upon the table, all her favorites. She was overjoyed that her husband had proposed such a romantic gesture for her. But Petronius Maximus did not arrive at the dinner, and she was caught unawares by the entrance of Valentinian, who traced his finger through his fine reddish hair. At first he laughed, and she politely laughed and asked herself to be excused, but then the emperor mentioned that the ruse had meant to be for her husband, who had lost a sporting bet. While the sun had found such a companion in northern beauty, it had left freckles on her throbbing robins, reddened chest, and strands of strawberry sunshine in her hair, as white downy feathers by her. They laughed for a while, and she took him for a simple dandy, letting him play with her hair, and the candlelight of her angular features, heavenly fair rosy cheeks, perky bosom, and glimmering doe eyes overtook Valentinian, who was too fond of wine, especially when making his jokes, and began to make advances towards Maximus's wife. He squirted water through his incisors at her. She blushed, suggesting that she was making her wet. So he told her he had always longed for her, and that it was only natural because they were both young. She protested, and eventually he wore her down and she relented, and there on the dinner table he ravished her. Now the young wife was naive. She had thought perhaps this was the design of her rich husband to excuse her debt, as he had imparted his signet ring to Valentinian, and he imparted upon her finger after finished thrusting into her blossom. She was no longer chaste, and she was furious at her husband that she accused the affair of being his idea when she showed him the bruises. He was heartbroken and humiliated, but so long as Aetius was the strong man the emperor, he could leverage nothing against the emperor. The seeds of vengeance were planted. Petronius Maximus may not have been good at betting in games, but he was good at plotting them. He needed Aetius out of the way to take vengeance on Valentinian, who used his ambitions of his pawn, Heraclius, as well as Valentinian's ambitions himself, to kill both of them with one stone, and the third bird, Heraclius, his accomplice, would follow. For 10 years, from 440 AD to 450 AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, the Vandalic navy had continued to grow in strength. It was the dominant power in the Mediterranean. With this power came recognition of Tripolitania and Byzacena were sovereign, and now outside of Roman control. The rumors said that to apply pressure to Aetius, Genseric encouraged Attila, king of the Huns, who lorded over the Gepids and Burgundians, to attack the Visigoths, who was tied to by marriage. Other rumors said that it was the sister of Valentinian, Augusta Gregia Honora, who made the offer with a ring and letter inviting Attila to take his place at the Roman command to avoid her confinement, whereas others dared whisper, take her hand in marriage. For the past decade, Attila had been running extortion against the western and eastern emperors, laying waste to central Pannonia until he had been a camp beyond the Danube. This changed when Marcian declared that he would have no more gold for Attila, only iron, and the praetor sought the weakened frontier of the west, which may have been used to him given Aetius's previous relation with the Huns, with Heraclius was quick to whisper into Valentinian's ear at Maximus's behalf. The situation in Gaul was deteriorating ever since Aetius had returned to command in Italy. Germania and Inferior surrendered to the Salian Franks, and in crisis succession supported the son of Clodia, Childeric, over Merovic by his brother on Attila's decree. The Visigoths and Narbonne Tours were subdued to compliance by the status quo, and the Burgundians east of them were rebellious. The Alans, also to the west, were secured, but their fortunes were very much tied to the Visigoths. Armorica was completely abandoned, along with Britain and the provincial coast of Aurelianum, leading up to the Seine and Loire to Soissons and the Ars and the Rhine and the Rhone, with northern Gaul turned to the Frankish territory and remained firmly under Roman control. So by 450, Attila made his claim to invade Gaul and lift up new kings of the France, taking half of the Western empires as dowry to his marriage to Valentinian III's sister. It was believed that he had mistaken her pleas to him, as honester Magisterium had confused the request of marriage. In 451, he carved a path of destruction across Gaul, with cities such as Paris and Troy being saved only by their having their religious figures and dignitaries convince Attila not to put the cities to torch and rapine slaughter. Finally, Attila reached Aurelianum, which he expected to defect its defenders, Alans. In fact, the Alans were some of the most loyal defenders of Gaul, and the city had to be besieged. Valentinian, indeed, Aetius would have none of it, and Aetius made work of convincing the most powerful of the Germanic kingdoms of Gaul, the Visigoths, under the new king Theodoric and his son Thorismund, to join the Roman defense. Theodoric declined, citing the Romans had too few men to fight in the battle with Visigothic lands. Only with the convincing of Vetus, former Praetorian prefect of Gaul, Aetius's envoy, and the true spectacle of Attila's ravages of Gaul, was Theodoric committed to the Roman defense, which would take place on the Mauritius Plains, also known as the Catalaunian Plains near Troy. So eloquent was Aetius's rallying against the Huns that undecided and wavering barbarian groups joined the Romanic Gothic coalition.
The story of the battle is that after the Huns were chased from Aurelianum across the countryside of Gaul, the Franks allied to the Romans under Merovic met with a Gepid force in a skirmish along a ridge that sloped down to an open field to the Catalonian plains. The Huns were on the right side of the ridge, met with opposition by Visigoths, while the Romans held the left side of the ridge, and the Alans, who were skilled horsemen and would not be driven over like so many opponents of the Huns in the past, held the middle of the ridge. It was estimated that Attila had over 35,000 warrior nomads on the day of battle, along with Gepids and Burgundians and Ostrogoths that Valamir had joined his banner. In the opening charge to keep the Huns from gaining the slope, Theodoric I, king of the Visigoths, was killed, but morale remained unaffected as nobody had noticed he had perished, when his son fought on like a madman. Injured, bolstered by the Romans, and the chaotic, piercing forays of the Huns were unable to break the Atlantic center of the Romano-Gothic formation. Leading up to the high point of the ridge were nearly unsurmountable piles of Hunnic and Visigothic dead, and the Romans claimed the field. Attila's camp was nearby, surrounded by wagons and makeshift fort. He was nearly killed in the fighting outright before fleeing to this point, where he piled up anything flammable, intending to immolate himself before the coalition could kill such a king as him. The campsite was besieged by the remaining Visigoths under Thorismund, vengeful at the news of his dead father, insisted that Aetius finish Attila there. Instead, Aetius told the new king, Thorismund, to return to his home, so that his plotting brothers could not overthrow him in his absence at war. He begged to end the menace immediately and watch the broken boat burn on a pyre, but Aetius retired with his army. It was the same story he had told to the Franks, and Heraclius, when he learned of this, was quick to point out that he didn't destroy this usurper of Valentinian's sister's honor, not because he feared for his allies, but that his allies would surpass Attila in power, and he feared them, and that Attila would be easier to deal with, and Aetius had always dealt with Huns in the past. But Aetius was unable to deal with them, and they returned on the same enemy that had spared, this time not for Gaul, but Venetia and northern Italy. Attila carved a swath of destruction from Aquileia in the heartland until he realized in 452 that his ranks were brimming with famine and disease, that he had pushed as far as he could go. Whether the plague or God's mercy, Rome had been delivered. The Pope Leo left the city walls and delivered a speech to Attila to spare the city Rome, and Attila relented, his empire to be devoured shortly after by its own Germanic vassals a mere 2 years later, far to the east in Gepid lands. Aetius' failure to protect northern Italy was a failure in Heraclius' cap. He now had the evidence that Aetius valued his career more than the destruction of his sworn enemies, but Attila's resulting death at his wedding of a nosebleed, perhaps from poisoning, convinced the Roman people that Aetius was the safer of the West for his victory at the Catalonian. As Aetius grew more powerful and popular over the following years, and the capital more threatened and dependent on the military, Heraclius, in cooperation with Maximus, implied to Valentinian that Aetius meant to kill him or replace him as emperor. Yet his mother's advice, as someone listens to his mother, has never been threatened by a charismatic Roman patrician. Maximus knew the tensions were growing between his two obstacles of power and vengeance. When he heard him speaking in Aula in court, as it was to these two elderly and married, they argued so frequently. That didn't bother me. After all, I was in Africa. What bothered me is that I learned the truth from Aetius, had not misguided the strength of the Visigoths, and the rumors of Genseric's incitement of their departed king were proven correct. Valentinian III had tired of Vandalic gains in the southern seas. His daughter was becoming older by the day. Finally would cement a lasting peace between the Vandals and the West. Eudocia, his daughter, would be promised to Hunneric. We saw Hunneric's answer to that, the Visigoth princess leaving the port of Carthage where I was. There were calls of bon voyage and blessing to Normanensis. She was led in her carriage and finally left it in torchlight, not but a ghost of what she had been when Hunneric had finished with her. I heard her snuffling and coughing and made to see her face if Hunneric had struck her in the eye. Be he that beast. She had been implicated in a poisoning plot against Genseric under the pretense of urging Attila to war. She was quite alive and being sent home, but the lump and scars wilted to her nose and ears, where they had once been. The laughter, the wild laughter of the devout Arians chilled me, and Hunneric standing with a grin on his face chilled me more. I'd seen the barbarity of my people, the public scalpings, the hoisting of men naked through the streets, but nothing had prepared me for that look on the princess's eyes cast down if she deserved her treatment. The Visigoths would want revenge for her princess. I didn't know when they would have it, only that it would be brutal. It was no way to treat a lady. and no way to treat Eudocia by promising her to such a man. September, Anno Domini 454. The account of Decimus Vanius Cato. They call me Smart Decimus. Smart Decimus, Smart Decimus. Except it's an insult. Fitness isn't just working with brawn, it's working with your mind, working with your hands. One day, when I was trying to use the pen, my brother would hit my hands until I was better with that pen. Said that a sultry redhead was calling me strange. I went home and received my beatings from him for it. Now this is worse than he might actually think when he's nicknamed the Fist. I waited 2 years until she was working as a tout, finished off her silky clam until she cried with my penmanship. I think and hope he got the point then. When men are growing, they have no time for studies. When girls are growing, they have nothing but time for it. This way, when I'm as empty as Moses, I'll have something else to show for it. Before I was growing, I had no time for spitballs or slingshots, and just sat in a malaise, reading my books until I could see through the pages. I call it the down, up. Some call it life. Daughters of the Legio Gemina, I found my mellow, bright, sweet-talking polities just fine, but I've never had much use for the Solidus. Whatever I tell myself, the Solidus is important to mellow, bright daughters of the Legio Gemina. Some people want to win her with accounts. Some people want to shin the goat's bladder out of the field when they're the last man standing. Besides, if I was in the business of settling scores, I'd polish every last climb in this Byzantine city for every time I was called strange. That's all right, though. I wouldn't cheat the 11th time. I've always got my angel Priscilla, but that's a story for another day. I work for Gaudentius, the son of Pelagia and Flavius Aetius, as scribe. When something needs writing down, I'm the boy responsible. In fact, chances are, if you're reading this, I wrote all of it, or parts are passed down to me. Gaudentius is 10 years my junior. I promised to give his hand in marriage to Placidia, the second daughter of Valentinian III. I've had some girlfriends, but they mostly like to pick my brain for knowledge and be a shoulder to cry on. I was kicked out of my seminary for violent tendencies. That's a nice way of saying I stole the breath from every soul except my brother, who made the mistake of not putting me on Queer Street before calling me a queer. The first one with 2 towering boys who got it in the neck. But the Scythian, he was exaggerating of his injury for sympathy to the headmaster, so I just kept hitting him. Others in the gut until they bent both the knees. Now I have problems with other, even bigger Scythians, and they wouldn't bother me at the seminary. It was at the seminary that I first fell entranced to a girl I called the Levantine. She's the second daughter of Johannes, a soldier of the Ardibur Ashbur. Her proper name is Eleonora, and every time I try to talk to the tiki mushroom of Meerkat, I get so nervous that I stare at the ground. We've had some great chats about the nature of affinity, the nature of the soul, and her faith. She doesn't care much for the faith of the seminary, dabbling in everything across the side from mana to mana. She doesn't like me because I don't get out much. Once upon a time I wouldn't leave my work because the sun burnt my flesh as red as Valens, the stuffed emperor of Rome, captured by the Sassanids. And now I don't leave because I have few friends and I'm very slow to trust. Mine's a puzzle sometimes. I'm a Valens, of the Valens gens, not the same as the late emperor, of course, but I wouldn't be licking Gaudentius' boots. Or else. Now I look nowadays like a jigsaw too, but that was after the dark times of Rome that I mean to tell. I'm under the tutelage of a certain Gallo of the Hipporegus, trained to translate texts, and I work for the new forum in Rome, commissioned by the patron building along with the plots Petronius Maximus. I was a resident of the Marechia Rivia up until 5 years ago, when I met Trostilla. I sure wish the circumstances of our meeting could have been different, but there's no need to go into that now, and sadly I owe that man of Aetius. No, I just don't work for Aetius' son, I work for the Magister indirectly, which is a sore place to be in if you can't wield your cock better than the blade. Gallerith is supposed to help me with that, but he's long been in a sojourn with his native Vandalic Africa, so I have more important things to worry about presently, like meeting with my master's enemies. The chief eunuch of the palace, Heraclius, has been poisoning the air of Valentinian for some years ago about my charge's father, Aetius, and that bald, sacred man of scheming's best friend is Maximus Petronius. We don't have any special relationship except for working at the library, but he owns Rome, and that means he owns us. So when you get called from your scrolls and a pen, you go to meet him and see what you can do. but not without first telling your master Gaudentius having both the pedigree of Aetius and his mother Pelagia, being expected to replace the emperor if Aetius would ever overthrow him. Aetius isn't concerned by the rumors and speaks kindly to Valentinian, as if he was her own son. Promise had been made during the compromises with his mother, and once Aetius served the usurper of the Theodosian line, Johannes. Aetius had a quiet way of defending himself whenever the emperor's temper would boil over the losses he had suffered in Spain and Africa and the decline of the West, almost as if he was speaking to a less rational man. Which he was, but his defense would never turn an anger or uproar, and he wanted Caesar to be happy in his command and focus on their successes. So I was on my way to the forum to meet Petronius Maximus. I walked into the forum and found it abandoned concrete, except for pigeons to flock around. Sitting in his gray space was a gray man with wizened eyes and a crease on the side of his face. Decimus Phanius of Gaudentia, Senator, I said curtly to him. I recognized his appearance immediately. This was the richest man in Rome. There was no evil in his voice or intent, only a desire for power and the disdain for tomfoolery or any lack of seriousness in business. He was an austere man, as clearly heard as what happened to his wife. There's an orphan in my letter. I'm wondering if I should kill it now, he said to himself, peering up at me. And so there vanished my illusion of austerity and lack of sense of fun in the man. "Do you want help? I can strike it from the edges," I said, smiling. Notarizing this should be fine. This is a request for the consulship of Italy and the rate of patrician. Do you know what that means, boy? That's a weird way of saying you want an extended tenure for Aetius, I said, beating my breath. He wouldn't dare expose himself to the son of Aetius' friend. Clever lad, one day your smarts won't count for parts and you'll be without a horse. I expect better discretion in this matter than given to Hyacinth by Augustus, sister of Caesar. It's to be given directly to Reckless. You know who he is. The one, without your downfall. What would us mortals be without a downfall, Petronius, I said, shifting my feet. Speaking of which, do you like Eleanor, Johannes' girl? You know I could arrange that. There was nothing that he'd arrange I couldn't try myself. Elia who? I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. That's why you call you Decimus the smartass. Now do as I told her, I might hasten my plans. In a hurry, sir, I said, bowing to him, scraping a trail at his feet almost. Yes, there's a grand feast later this month, and all will be in attendance. I'll spare you the details, but Caesar can get quite drunk at these events, and he needs all due information to be prepared. You don't want to upset your emperor, now, do you? The emperor was in danger of no one except for perhaps Maximus himself, although Caesar had taken drink excessively, paranoid about the affairs that took place in the shadows, amplified ever since his sister's offer to Attila, which he had considered severely punishing her for. Apologies. I'll consider this at the utmost urgency, Senator, I said, taking it, reading over the page's intention, a quick stamp once I had finished reading. It was for vacant offices, those not currently held by the magistrate except for patrician. I took the letter to the eunuch's office. It was hard to get in. There were lines of protesters to reach out to the heir of Valentinian through Heraclius, the sacred commissarius. I pushed my way through them. Heraclius came out to see me. This is a request from Petronius Maximus, I said to him. I had known him for a long time. Long enough to know his former balls were stitched and not caldered. So that meant listening to many a sermon against Aetius and any who broke his thinkers men, centralized power free of checks and balances. Of all the chamberlains, this one had taught me when to speak and when Galarith, and how to know different audiences. I had been lacking in tact to those who were bigger than mine. That's why I had conflicted so often. Good then. You didn't see anything on your way, boy, Heraclius said, looking busy. It's just one thing, sire. I can't help but notice you were seeking the office of Patriciae. His eyes became annoyed. Where even at the gall of me to ask. What of it? It's just my Bronco. Demetrius, he dies in fire the minute I get to Rome. There's a logistical concern for people who want to carry word to Gaudentius, my master. Then your diplomats get back from the boats to Salona just as I'm about to take the horse back to Maracchio to continue with the good work. That's fine. I have other horses, but the boat, it sinks. Now I'm late to tell anyone that the fire has been set by pagans, and my welcome back home has been somewhat uncomfortable. If you're going to say something, say it, or just leave me or never return. I'll have you run through. And then Eleanor, of all people, shows up in the old Cuckold's address book. You cut me loose. Just like Gaudentius and just like Aetius here. It seems Rome is a hostile audience for the old guard, Heraclius. Ever since you got word from that scarecrow Martian. He replied, and your unwelcome reception, flaming Bronco, has nothing to do with the robbing man of a life, we'd imagined. The average story, then, won't change Valentine's mind. You want to see how insignificant you and your little girlfriend are? Pay a visit to the palace in Ravenna this month for the banquet. It will not disappoint. So without my horse, I ran as quickly as I could to tell the palace guard, to tell Gaudentius and Carpilla that their father should be warned. I nearly burst through the doors out of breath. When I arrived, Carpilla, who had been like an older brother to me, and Gaudentius were laughing. Yes, there's a banquet later this month, on the 21st of September. All is well, you boy, cries Wolf. What? How do you know? Because we found this in Heraclius' trash bins. You know we're keeping a good eye on you. They held their letter requesting office from Petronius Maximus. It had been ripped in two. Our father will be fine, know-it-all. Now you have visitors. Galderith has taken a ship from across the Mare Africa and is here with Trustilla.
I looked over the desk to the entrance of the room, and a man whose sandy blonde hair had been savage as much as his gritty cheeks and sandpaper stood with the lining of silver in his hair. It was Galderith. The creased, glaring eyes of the Scythian Trustilla was at his side. I called over Trustilla and questioned him sternly. You told Heraclius about the slaying on the river, I whispered into him. He looked shocked to hear this, his eyes, and said calmly, What slaying do you mean? There were many. I thought to press the issue, but didn't want to embarrass myself in front of Galderith the Vandal. The man who has taught me Phoenician, Egyptian, and Greek, and how to write it on my own body. You'd never miss how many addresses of girls I've been able to recall from your talents. I said, smiling, walking forward and grabbing his arm. He said a few words in Phoenician to me, asking for me to leave the palace and come outside. I nodded and followed him down the stairs through the hall, squinting at the light that shone through the windows and arms. Fresh air. Breathe deep. Sunlight. Soak it in. Feel it give you strength. Nothing to be afraid of. I had nearly closed my eyes all the way before him to the office of the Chamberlain. The sun stung my eyes and numbed them, nearly blinding me for a moment. Yet the two people I've spoken with outside the palace walls have been utter scheming rats. Help me with my lessons. What a wicked web we weave when at first we aim to deceive. What a wicked web we weave when at first we aim to deceive, I replied the last bit in Phoenician as best I could, wagging my head. He ignored me. Ever thought about returning to play the ball games on the Campus Martius or the seminary? Galderith asked me. With who? Levantine, I asked cheekily. Don't call her that. We work with crypticism, we don't speak in it. Call her Eleonora. But no, I meant more your friends Gaudentius or Carpilla. They're up by the pools and baths and ocean all the time. Maybe your cousin, Priscilla. Don't call her that, Eleonora. I know you're afraid of Trustilla. I know you're afraid of his power. Priscilla and my other cousins work. When they have time for corn or those things, it's with the little ones. Me, a happy house servant. I'm told Dina Paris said you were quite the athlete in your youth. He smiled, patting me on the back as we walked. I shrugged from the pat of his hand a reflective flinch. You've been talking to Trustilla. What business of it is yours? When the sun goes down, we'll both go to the banquet. Maximus will serve his pompous ass when the emperor confronts about his demands in the presence of a head seat, Idius. Galderith sighed. He still wore a dried, wilted ring of thorns upon his neck, and they'd left a creased scar on that neck. One day the sun will go down, and you'll wonder where your time went. But you're going up to march a day in the heat with a spear in her hand. You'll have to live up to Gaudentius when he's old enough. I'm going to toughen you up, Cato, and if that means sweating in places other than attics, training regiments like when you were young. We stepped into the Visigothic courtesans we were attending the forum earlier that day. Galderith stopped me in track and put his arm on my shoulder. There's someone I'd like to introduce you to. He introduced me to the Gothic princess, who I could not stand to look at. A hollow snub was where her nose should be, and her ears were stubbed as well. She wore a veil, but I could see the mutilations through the black veil, the cloth of a sister of the clergy. All cultures are not equal. In my southern home, examples are made of those who oppose the errant church. Any Romans who dare oppose the new order, they are gruesome. You could never think Gaudentius doing this to bribe Presidia, now Huneric, a prince of greater stature than him in the land I serve. Now Matasuntha, The sister of King Thorismund shares my faith and my forgiveness for the voracious and knows that each day is a blessing. She has a smell as someone who hadn't bathed, and I knew it wasn't because she couldn't sense herself now and needs someone to care for her. I've learned to live half alive, and yet you choose it willingly. Take advantage of your unfettered lungs, your able arms, and your hearing ears, she said, tone deaf. Take advantage of them now, because if cruelty does not take them, old age will one day. That moment stayed with me. We discussed the church, and though he had said the outdoors were scary, I had been scared to think straight otherwise, but venturing out and seeing someone deprived of her senses more willing as I had. She told me the story of the Battle of the Mauritius Plains. She told me that the Visigothic center of power would be shifting to the west in Spain, and that none of Genseric's piracy and Balearics would interfere with the bustling trade that flowed from Tarragon to Toledo, with generals like Ricimer and Raz in the west, and the Visigoths, a place of friends secured by Aetius, would continue hesitantly. They were rivals at sea, and in dishonorable adventures, competitors. She told me that her brother would have vengeance against the Vandal fleet at some time when they least expected it. She blamed Genseric for urging Attila to attack the Visigoths, and now she saw their state as an allied kingdom torn apart by peace to come. The Vandals had fortresses as far as Italy as to Sicily, and would have to be abandoned should peace last. It is Ravenna, September 21st, 454. We begin. To Aetius, thrice consul, the groans of the Britons. The barbarians drive us to the sea drives us to the barbarians. Between these two means of death we are either killed or drowned. From the Gemitus Britannorum. The banquet in Ravenna had some of the best food I had ever had, and it just so happened to be that the discussion was my patron's former lands, which had been bereft of support for over a half-century. Also highlighted by many fine speakers, including the emperor and the patrician, was the destruction of the Hunnic kingdom by the Germanic vassals, the Gepids, Heruli, and Ostrogoths, and the death of their king Aelach on the Savus River at Nadau. Wine and blue trees were rare gifts for a scribe such as I, and I sipped my goblet of wine, savoring every bit of the red fluid. It was the feel of soft gold upon my hands, a fortune I couldn't feel in my pocket for a lifetime. Gaudentius and Carpilla were not in attendance, both having spent their nuptials with their wives back in Rome. I spoke briefly with Petronius Maximus, who laughed at our prior spat, and when I lost track of the conversation, looking to Eudocia and her handmaiden Eleonora. He looked at me coldly when Eleonora walked out of the banquet hall to the back room and says, "There she goes, she's walking away, she's walking out the door. Try luck with Eudocia then." Before my temper could get the better of me, I said my goodbyes and returned to the squires who were making notes on the speakers of the evening. It's hard to express for someone who wasn't alive then, that for nearly 15 years, just how popular the de facto ruler of the Western Empire, Aetius, was. He was a family man, loved both of his sons dearly. He was a strategist, but to some he was also a man whose pragmatism had left some in the dust, used and abused. I noticed in attendance the blond lion, named Majorian, known to be gallant and expelled from Aetius' service 4 years earlier. He had served under Aetius in the Gallic campaigns near Toronum, under the senior officer of the Suevigoth Ricimer. Majorian was very charismatic and heroic on the field, and had numerous decorations for bravery as a leader of cavalry charges such as Turinensis against the Franks of Clodio, Meribic's father. Pelagius had convinced Aetius that Majorian would be a threat to his relationship with Valentinian, as Placidia was coming of marrying age, and Valentinian was at the time believed to want to marry the younger daughter of the similarly aged cavalry Euvenius, Majorian. To make the distance of the relationship impractical, Aetius discharged Majorian from his service, and he vanished from military service. Now he had returned for some reason. I walked up to him where he was eating and asked the seat to be excused. May I sit with him for a while? Placidia is happy with the new engagement, I told him. That's a comfort. Gaudentia is not as stern as his father. Her older sister is sold to some temporary promises that can be relied upon. There are many other opportunities around every bend you'll find, Cato, he replied. He continued, "They told me that Matasuntha, the former betrothed of Honericus, has come to court here in Ravenna. She should not have been forced into the clergy." You seem to care deeply about this. She's better serving the downtrodden than being a spinner in Spain lost your commander. You'll find widows have no such limitations. They're not responsible for what happens to their husbands. He waved a hand to Pelagia, sitting and laughing with his women's friends. Well, not always. And what new opportunity have you found in public life? To keep order, especially against that one, he pointed to Petronius Maximus. I nodded in agreement and raised my glass to him. The red banners of the Empire were down every hall where the eagle was positioned. Valentinian sat his seat at the throne of the Roman Empire, eating little and listening to every formal address at every informal night. His domestici were all there, bodyguards, and the minister sat in a wooden seat with no meal but papers upon the table in front of him. The papers were his meal, and to help to digest them there was a single singe cup of garum and wine. He seemed bothered by something. Perhaps he had already learned that Maximus, who he had reason to trust for their betting an affair, was becoming ambitious. Though he ate little, he drank liquid courage, glass after glass, and the nerve in his eyes told me he was not pleased with the financial report delivered in September. There were many tables upon this hall of the palace, but I noticed for this occasion the cadavers had been made of skulls of some tables. Grave robbing and trophy taking were against the code of the church, but it couldn't make for this delicious food to rise from my gut. I figured they must have been volunteers of the deaths, some at the whim of Caesar. Everything else was pleasant: stuffed mushroom, dormouses, thrushes, eels, even a great ribs portion, Cornish hens for every guest present, even if they had to eat from their plates standing to make the room for the whole huge attendance. Aetius was reading a very long financial account, last of which he concluded the summary of the Dux Bellorum Ambrosius Aurelianus called Arcturus, that he had been able to continue his struggle near the Antonine walls in Gododin, as the natives called Picts, invested the land. He told Valentinian that the Dux meant to make one last stand, the last fortifications in Britain remaining, Vandal King. It had been a long financial summary, and Aetius was rather hoarse in the throat by the end of it, if not to paint a bright picture of the coffers of the Western Empire, mostly due to a loss of rich Spain to the Visigoths, which Aetius had a wife from, and seen as the location of his greatest blunders, having lost the majority of Spain to the Swabians and Visigoths by 449. Valentinian spoke. Have you heard the phrase, "speak of the devil"? Like any ghost, a trespassing spirit cannot enter without first an invitation. Aetius here speaks of his successes and sings of the death of Vandal King of the Huns. But it was he for their capture, and all captives fall for love for the captor, invited the Huns' company served for the usurper. They passed over the poorest border by his will, and once they had dug in, Attila was welcome to rape our mothers in Aquileia and the Hotland. His own daughter has married one of these savages in Thorstilo. Aetius now speaks to me in his slurred language, almost a forethought of the depravity he rolls in our failures, the solidus lost under Ambrosius Aurelianus and Villadella Corum. But the local chieftain of the Britons, the Vortigern, first spoke with the devil. He left a plate of milk and for the cat, and invited the pagans, Hengist and Horsa, to dine. Our Fatus loses in Spain to the Visigoths. Invited by Constantine and Iosanus' master, the usurper, and losses in Africa, invited by Bonifacius, who served his pleasant Gothic wife. All the loss of the revenue of the vast breadbasket of the empire. In Italy itself, invited and excused by this wretch who means to usurp me by his own son and wife from another man, who invited evil. At this point, Aetius made words ready to defend himself, speaking quiet as he always did when Valentinian was enraged and drunk. Perhaps you should stop drinking. It was Johannes' predecessor, Honorius, who has cost us Britain. I cannot commit to a thing that has been overrun. My daughter is married a loyal man. My son Goduntius will always be loyal to you, Caesar. Johannes was an able commander, but before your mother and Aspar disarmed him and paraded around the Hippodrome, I made promise to her that I will always honor him, and not him, Caesar. You forget, before his beheading, he had the honor not to extinguish a line, but merely combat the East. I knew he had spoken wrongly, and I began to feel nauseous and tempted to rise, but Majorian placed an arm on mine. The delicious food just spoiled with the wine I had drunk and made me sick. I wouldn't have another drop. Maximinus, the bodyguard and domesticus of Aetius, waved his hand down at the emperor, trying to convince him to back off. "And here Aetius speaks of the devil again," he said, shaking his fist. "I can only smell the brimstone of that wretch Johannes in these very halls." He danced about, waving his finger as looking for a point of divination, and then the finger wagged and pointed rigid to a skull that burned on a candle in the table a mere 4 paces from Aetius. He looked with eyes rolling to Aetius. Valentinian unsheathed his sword and crushed the skull that lay upon the table, brittle as it was. Here lies what would be left of his matter interred, his skull. The son of the devil will never have our empire. Now, Heraclius, give counsel to your emperor. Give counsel to Caesar. There were gas and tables being uplifted, and the spectators rose from their seats in fright. Heraclius ran to Aetius' side and wrestled him from his seat. Then, throttling him, Valentinian leapt upon the table and shouted, Sic semper tyrannis, and struck Aetius on the top of the skull with his sword. There was no blood at first, but then it welled up, and Valentinian pulled back his sword, Steinberger, and Aetius fell upon the table, his arms twitching and failing to hold on to the table, to keep right, flailing until he fell from the table cold. Trostilo, Attila, and I stood, and had to stand, to take it in, along with many others who were loyal to Aetius. If young Gaudentius was there, he would have fought, and I would have died with him, but his engagement to Placidia annulled after the violence. I worried for both of their fates. Aetius had been popular, and Valentinian as powerful as many considered to be the true throne, whatever the formalities. What I didn't know was that the honeymoon was Placidia's idea and that it had been ordered by her young father. The hall was in an uproar. It was determined the magister was dead, so many calling out in vain as the emperor had gone too far. Poor showing, some called in dismay. The friendship with the Visigoths and the coalition had been secured by Aetius, so Ricimer was understandably put off by Valentinian's impulsive actions, and Trostilo and Attila were downright furious. With Aetius's death, Valentinian was left in sole control of Rome's army and fate, relegating the lower command to Majorian, domesticate, without Martian to assist him. Martian, who I learned would not assist Aetius or any of the old guard. The city of Ravenna was cold and somber as a graveyard that night. While Valentinian reveled, I rushed back to the library in Rome to assure the marriage of Gaudentius Placidia had not been severely and mortally wounded. From the intrigued mind of Heraclius applying to Valentinian, Gaudentius could have borne a son who would replace him and be more powerful in the eyes of the military as well as respected by the East. I tried not to put any blame on Gaudentius, but he knew he had influenced the event haplessly. The palace guard was put under the control of Majorian after the assassination, and he had no doubt been aware of the emperor's intentions, and Pelagius' jealousy would have prevented him from protecting Aetius. Majorian was cool-headed on his return to see Placidia and Gaudentius to tell them of their father's death. The men at his side wanted to ensure the boy did not overreact. He had feelings for her, and they had been roused when the emperor had fielded his proposition. But he never approved of dowries before marriage, even though his family was rich, and just wanted to separate his friend from a bond that had become unsustainable, with the least heartbreak possible. They rode with 8 guards under that cover of night and arrived in the morning in the city of Rome, taking with them the news of the transition of Aetius' death was Cato. We arrived at the home of the two. The 2 praetorians were left at the door, while me and myself accompanied Majorian to enter the house. The church forbids sex before marriage, but we were all young here and knew the duo might be indecent, so we went first on Majorian's orders. The couple left half nude under the sheets, and Gaudentius rubbed his eyes as I entered, blearily collected his sentence. He called for his guards, but they had already been placated by the praetorians. Cato, come in. Did Maximus overreact? No, I just figured we could have some breakfast. I'm here with Majorian, who's going to escort Placidia back to Syria. But Father, Placidia, close them belongings, please. Cato, you demon, have you no matters, you gritty-sized sea-all? It's morning. Placidia asked, rising from bed, and I cast my eyes away from her royal rack with tan lads wearing a bikini at the Attila beaches near Rome. Gaudentius got dressed and exited the balcony where a table was set up and half-finished goblets of wine sitting from the night before. The hounds in the house licked and sniffed at me as I joined him on the balcony. As sour as I was, there was a charnel pit with a skillet on it, and he broke some quail eggs and let them simmer before whipping them up a bit. You brought blonde Adonis Majoris to my home? Never were the best with tact, Cato, he said, annoyed. He insisted on coming to escort Placidia back to see her father, was the emperor's command. I've come to tell you that I will stay in your service, and Gallerus will serve you as however he can in Africa. He rubbed his eyes and then ripped into the eggs famished. He held the knife with a wooden spoon properly, reflecting as upward. His nude ribs smelt of sweat and sex, and threw a ground on from the outside. Yes, of course.
You're going to sit at the best man's table. Galler can serve as deacon. Go get a taste of the faith that's persecuted over there.
What does the Emperor have to say to his daughter?
Many things, I answered, casting my eyes down. I couldn't stomach eating eggs at this dire hour, having vomited already. Then why rise us so early if nothing's changed? He kicked around and whipped the eggs with his knife. Things changed, Gaudentius. Your father's been killed, I said quietly. He turned over his plate and the table that lay down and ripping the tablecloth with his knife. He left me from the balcony and charged into his quarters. A blow was placed on my head, and he would have savaged me further if he had the time for it. Which one of you? Tell me now, he roared at Majorian. You, Maximus, or Ricimer? Majorian, who had been calming the Emperor's daughter and helping her get dressed, didn't answer at first, taken aback by his fury. Gaudentius lunged at him and held the knife to his throat. You forget royalties lie here in Rome, raged Gaudentius. I'll take your throat and Heraclius' tonsils that act as his balls if you mean to replace me, he said. I walked in quietly behind Gaudentius to seize both of his arms so he didn't get himself killed. I then said quietly, the Emperor was drunk, he hit him on the head with his sword. Gaudentius took in the information and knew that he wasn't for the engagement or it would make his life forfeit. He knew now that the engagement was coming to an end, and he saw the hurt and tears in Placidia's eyes. And what if Valentinian lies dead? What then, Majorian? He screeched. Then your mother-in-law, Licinia Eudocia, will become regent and Ricimer decide, and anyone who threatens her will answer to Martians, Conquest, and Rash. Same as before. I did not seek this. Your lady did not seek this. Majorian gritted his teeth and gasped. He pulled the eating knife back from Majorian's neck and took several steps back. Majorian, listen to me. When our engagement is annulled, I want you to treat me with more care than life itself, because that is all I could offer her. That is all I would offer her. Protect her, please, he said, steadying his voice, his eyes all betrayed and hurt. Through her tears, Placidia approached Gaudentius and held his trembling head in her hand, kissed him gently, and he returned by hugging her tightly, dropping the knife, and kissing her so passionately, almost savagely, that her lower lip began to bleed. She returned the painful embrace, and they kissed each other's necks, smothering each other, butting heads. At last she cradled his head in her chest, and she kissed his head again and again. Princess, Majorian interjected. She said, I will not leave him. Away with you both, she stammered a set. I pulled Majorian aside and said, give my friend a moment. Let us wait by the entrance of the funicular Herodotus for 2 hours. That's all I ask. If she dies, I'm willing to hang for it. And I'm willing to place that noose around her neck before it's my turn. Heavens, you forget I love that girl, he answered. He walked back to Placidia, who was holding a much larger Gaudentius, and told her, we'll be waiting downstairs. I swear no harm will come to him. After 2 hours, she emerged from the doors of the manor, a cloak over her shivering body. How did my father do it? Not well. And whatever Sidonius, Apollinaris, and Cato write of it in the annals, I know this. He has cut off his right hand with his left, Majorian responded, holding an umbrella over her head and sheltering her arm around her shoulder. Valentinian had beheaded the military that had kept him teetering on the edge of oblivion from the East's indifference. What he hadn't done, and he clearly ordered Heraclius not to do, was replace the military command with another capable leader in the form of Ricimer or Maximus. Maximus felt that his old ranks were coming to him, and now with Valentinian digging his own grave, he felt Valentinian's daughters were coming to his son, the youngest who Valentinian no doubt had planned to marry to Majorian. Maximus's premature permission to seek the right of patrician had been denied by Heraclius on Valentinian's order. He intended to rule, and Heraclius and his cousin and wife at his side, with himself the protector of the lineage that had brought under the close care of Aetius and Bonifacius. Almost the entire military was loyal to Aetius, and Aetius played his own role over the past 10 years in ensuring that he wouldn't have a suitable successor, disenfranchising Majorian and keeping Ricimer in subordinate positions such as the Battle of Arelate. What began as a power vacuum quickly turned to bitterness and the desire for revenge at the death of Valentinian. Heraclius had broken his pact with Maximus, and Maximus was happy to facilitate the military's inactivity with new tasks, ones that would promote the empire's holdings in turmoil, and riches ruled in times of turmoil. Petronius Maximus had much of those. When I returned to Ravenna, in hushed tones Gallerius asked me what the hell I had been, and that the West was in a state of weakness not to be lost on the roads. I asked if peace would last, and Gallerius responded that Genseric knew that the marriage with Eudocia and Hunter was far too valuable to abandon peace, and that if anything it was a clean slate between the relations of the kingdoms. Still he warned me that Italy was more dangerous than Africa at the moment, and to stay by his side in case Gaudentius needed to flee the country.
Early March, the Fields of Mars. Galareth took me to the Fields of Mars, or Campus Martis, for the first time. It happened to be the month of March, with the old pagan parade conducted to honor the god of war, Ares or Mars. It was within the holiest days of the parade that the dictator Julius Caesar had been killed in the eyes of March. This glory was lost now, and the Roman army was not proud or happy, or celebrating any military victory. Those who had distant in the past recently deceased hero. Galareth was accompanied by Trostilla, his friend in the Battle of Rimini, and the main Visigothic woman named Matasunta. He told me to throw the disc several times to get the kinks of inactivity and waste and lackness out of my arms. He then told me to run 2 miles on the tracks of the field quarter in the northeast of Rome by the barracks. I was taught how to sling bullets from a bedrock bluff, much in the way the fundatories did. There were no trees to rest under, and the fields had more the appearance of a park, were it not for the disgruntled military presence. I spoke first to Trostilla. He looked back behind his head. I think I remember the slaying you mentioned now. We made a killing that night, the sinners of unlimited war on money. Thereby you remain untouched. War leaves its crime in its wake, and the wealth of commanders smooth things over. The soldiers who walked in formation in pomp and field looked angry. Some looked lost and some looked drunk. There was no order, no discipline. They were looking for someone to whip now that Adius was gone, and I was hoping it wouldn't be me. After all this footwork, it was the training that had turned Rome into a military machine of manipulative tactics. Now all the great shields, Scudum and the Sheen of Loricus and Bengana, were gone. Now we were a lightly armored mobile army, and had learned some of the cavalry of our foes in this late hour of the Western Empire, circling horses, wielded simple long swords of lamentati, far cry from the gladius stabbing weapon of the ages past. It was shown that the flagman of the drill instructor used to motivate the men, usually rattling on their shields or striking the horses on. Galareth smirked and showed me the scars on his back. I spoke to Trostilla about his loyalty to Adius and my reservations that Gaudacius might meet an execution by Valentinian to prevent any loyal soldiers from rallying to him. I explained that Majorian was expected to care for his princess Placidia. He told me not to worry about an execution of Gaudacius that would doom Valentinian in the military's eyes, he told me. But Gaudacius and Carpilio, they have endeavored to support the head of the Praetorian Guard, have they not? He is the strongest tie to Placidia and has sworn for the protection. Placidia loves and pities them, and Galareth here can act as a voice to Carthage where Eudocia is promised. Majorian does not believe in dowries. If he'd ever be emperor, he'd have the practice stricken for law and made illegal outright. If there is another suitor you might ingratiate yourself, it is the Dionysius, the line of Maximus, Olybrius. Now that is a man of good and gentle character, not unlike his cousin, who would never hurt your master. Maximus believes in dowries and believes in paying the military its full due. And what are you owed, my red friend? I asked with caution. He walked me through until we came to the archery range. There were a series of red-ringed targets 100 paces away. The beehive was tranquil. See that beehive above the tree that shelters these boughs? The hive makes honey and feeds the queen and the young with it, but when you agitate the hive, the bees fly forth and combat you. The way to kill the hive is to kill the queen. Then they become purposeless, lazy, and their honey becomes ripe for the spoils of a bear or beekeeper. But God damn the man who would make himself the arrow that pierces the hive. The bees do not fly outwards to fight, they fly inward, and the fletching becomes part of the hive in time. The emperor is chosen by Theodosians and God to lead. To speak otherwise is treason, I said softly. Save it, he's estranged the best people who can protect his empire from dismemberment. You want a new queen for his hive as well. Listen, don't bet on Majorian, bet on Maximus and Olybrius. For Placidia. Now that the leader of the hive is dead, Maximus will want to purge the arrowhead, make its fletching his own. Heraclius without the balls and therefore ambition won't cede to his wisdom. Trostilla answered. The marriage of Eudocia to Heinrich is the only thing keeping my king from the war on Rome, Galareth cautioned. Maximus will want Eudocia to be with Palladius, his son, instead. He would have both daughters, making Theodosian and Anician lines his own. He's wanted vengeance for Licinius' rape as long as stories can tell, but it's never been a wise choice. The army should remember that. Valentinian's lineage holds weight. Move carefully. We're all distraught over Aetius' death months ago, but life goes on. The woman who was with us, Matasunta, who had gotten horrid looks from the soldiers upon arriving on account of being a woman in a man's walk and her mutilations, said firmly,
I believe this bad peace with Valentine is invalidated, and those cursed Arians will have the Nicene Visigoths and Roman Empire to contend with. Sister, always pray for peace, Gallereth answered. You call what we witnessed at the banquet peace? Blood and rioters, butchery more common in Roman pieces than war, or suffer under tyranny than a common enemy, she huffed. We'll see, was the Trostilo's only reply. Instructed me to pick up the bow and fire the arrow straight. The first time a bee flew too close to my head and I spat apples, and nervously loosed an arrow without composure. I tried several times and I eventually hit a mark and continued practicing it until I could strike all but the furthest and the second furthest as will. Attila, who was an archer, approved of my early efforts and granted support, calling it beginner's luck in Germanic. My arms ached from the time I got home near to Maximus's library. I thought about Maximus being denied power, and it pleased me that he mistreated me, and I thought about me and Miss Libres, who Gallerus spoke on me as well.
Valentinian III just needed to show his new military that was one of them. He proudly wore a gilded military helmet in Serbian style with a crown of wreath upon it, designating him as Caesar, but his armor was common among heavy cavalry. I ride with you, brothers, he shouted, passing those resting and milling, exhausted training, walking with their gut pains and hangovers. He was best at archery, so he rode his white horse down to the archery range first. He passed by reluctant bows and disapproving faces from the soldiers who prowled the fields, none of which were the commanders who had grown very experienced with hiding their emotions. This was on March 16th of 455. He thought about having some of those who were sour-faced disciplined, and those that showed reverence knew he was in control, being fair to those who were loyal, and being fair to all. They just need to know I'm a man of the earth, he told himself, that will punish myself with discipline for their scorn. He could now refocus his efforts to that which was lost to the Visigoths, Suabia, Picardy, and Tarragon, now that peace had settled with the promises of his elder daughter to Honorius. He remembered it was a vile creature the boy had been, but Genseric would make a domineering father-in-law, and he was sure that the king's influence would make a welcome court for his daughter. The reconquest of Spain would be a new priority, and the southern sea quiet, all pirates having ceased from the Vandals. Piracy having ceased from the Vandals, and a new trade would add surplus to the emperor's provinces. What had led Aetius being removed from office permanently. Maximus's ambitions would go unanswered. They played that game, and he had lost, back in the days of the Blues and Greens. Perhaps Ricimer, Aetius' subordinate, was a popular choice for magister. It would certainly be more popular than his own honorary decree towards Attila, and it would backfire less. There were two Praetorians who rode with him, and they dismounted at the archery range first. The assembled magistrates were stern. Heraclius was already there, in order to advise him to promote Ricimer to tame Maximus's ambition and gain support from the military. The very military, as soon as he was briefed. Valentinian dismounted from his horse before a low-hanging tree to give himself some shade from the scorching sun of the early spring that baked his helmeted head on the way there. Some of the German federati approached from the open green fields to watch the spectacle. They were, however, armed. The bow on his back was gilded, and he went to fetch an arrow from the quiver. Heraclius stepped forward to give him the embrace and hand him his quiver. Then the blow came, a stunning clang against the shield of his temple, scraping away some outlying flesh which was cut too deep to bleed. Heraclius unsheathed his dagger in a huff and made towards them, but no one else. Stern disgust in their faces, and umbrellas of 20 men made to intercede. The emperor, thinking he had been crossed by Heraclius as well, turned to see who would assail them, and it was one of Aetius' Germanic men, Optilius. The emperor backed away, waiting for the Praetorians and the soldiers to come to his aid, but instead bumped into a tree, causing him to lose his balance and flailed to the ground. He was ran through in an instant by Attila, then stabbing him close to the heart. Flecks of blood burst from his lips, then bubbles of the ichor spilling out from his mouth. He had been stabbed in the stomach below the breastplate of his armor. His insides churned and his intestines sagged out of the belt line, and he felt sick, fell to the ground, heaving blood and gasping for air. Still no one moved, just observed the assassination with transfixed fascination. Trostio unsheathed his sword and yelled, "For the legion of Aetius, only snakes have no fig leaves." He punched away the dagger in the chamberlain's hand, and holding his arm outstretched, he cut Heraclius' throat deeply with the single drawing flesh, leaving him to bleed out in the track yards.
Trasio kicked the dead emperor across his mouth, sheathed his sword, and walked away with Attila, with no one stopping them, cursing to seek out Maximus, who had appealed him to finish the former Caesar. Those who had unsheathed their sword placed them back in their sheaths, with one man, Priscus, going back to check the emperor's pulse. Valentinian disturbed a hive of bees from the low-lying tree that he had crashed against, and the bees were swarming around the pool of blood he lay in, seeking entrance to his mouth as his glazed eyes stared into the blue sky. Over the following day and a half, the military made up its mind who would succeed the dead emperor. The queen, Licinia Eudocia, supported Majorian, whereas Majorian supported Lavinia herself, preferring to have his superior Ricimer become the magister. Others in the army supported Maximinus, the domesticus of Aetius, who had stood his ground against Valentinian at the banquet. And lastly, a large portion of the military, Trastilla and Attila included, were bought off or paid for personal protection from Maximus, who finally had his revenge against his enemies. Money won over the Empress and Majorian's camp, but the domesticus didn't stand a chance in the power struggle. When buying the military didn't seal the deal, they simply bought all the palace officials. By the night of the 17th, Petronius Maximus had spent his personal fortune to ensure the Praetorian Guard and the military had given full control of the palace, and he was declared emperor. Over the next few days, he showed himself to be a voracious and power-hungry emperor. He divorced disgraced Lucina, viewing her as damaged good for his slain foe, and forced marriage upon the widow of the emperor, Licinia Eudocia, who initially refused, stating plainly she suspected in the death of her husband. Majora, seeing the only way the wind was blowing, pleaded with the city the younger to marry Librius than Aetius, which she agreed to after deliberation and a brief date or two. On the day of the wedding, she could not stand to kiss him, even on the cheek, even though the pagans were shocked and appalled by the suddenness which he had seized the opportunity for marriage. Maximus and Lavinia. He spoke in hushed tones to her back, and Gaudentius had seen reverse of fortunes. Although Maximus was emperor, it was clear that it was only due to respect of military to the departed Aetius. It was Gaudentius who was honored that day, and Maximinus shadowed him as guard from that day forth. The eastern part of Martian refused to recognize Maximus as legitimate, so instead he relied on the Visigoths for protection, appointing the one man who was able to turn him over to the Roman side of the pass, Avitus, the Magister Militum, sending him to Toletum to convince the king that an alliance was required. Just as Trustius said he reneged on the offer of marriage to Eudocia, now his stepdaughter to Honoric, instead married her to his son, Palladius. Genseric received the news with much enthusiasm of the court in Constantinople, and promptly refused to relinquish his fortunes in Sicily. He viewed Gaudentius as key to his legacy in Rome, and although this bore well for me in foreign lands, did nothing in this dark time at home. The stage was being set for a war akin to the Trojan War, and demands for Rome to make good on our promises and protections of his favored people were reinvigorated. I went to comfort the newly engaged Eudocia, sister of Placidia, both about her father's death and the unwelcome marriage. But my girlfriend found me first. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and every power vacuum leads an opening. With all the money flowing into the palace and the estrangement of the Eastern Court, those in the Eastern Court need to make new allies and new sources of income. After the wedding, I walked through the streets alone past my old neighborhood, which will be explained further. I heard the criers speak of Eleonora, my Levantine, the honey trap of gold, the pitcher plant that will eat any insect, or connuptions. I was told by the songs, the graffiti on the walls of my neighborhood, that she was given freely as wine, fluid, and stays as carnally right as a beat of air upon a diving beetle's back. She rode a white horse and gained satisfaction from its foaming back. It was around that time that I noticed I was being shadowed and watched by white horses. She was a tap of water or wine. She dealt with the powerful and older men, they said. They said she was watched at all hours of the day, like a snow-white mare being used for a stud that had no privacy for her quarters. But one man could not have her, and that man was the cuckold, the one with 21 to win. At first I figured it was a bad joke. With all this uproar and negative attention he was receiving, whoever this 21 fellow was, the cuckold, perhaps presenting myself honest to her, I could liberate her both from it, and go quietly into obscurity. as family. Perhaps I could deliver both of us from this plague of word and songs, even if she wanted no part of my 21. I dressed my best for the occasion in the meeting with Eudocia, and my scrolls in hand, I turned the corner, and there was the Levantine, waiting for me, with a Cappadocian and an Aryan circlet around his neck. I was embarrassed, and I looked the noble, the elder Valens of my gens, but the girl with little enthusiasm for rich people looked the part. I realized I was wearing the same jerkin as when I had stabbed the man in the Cape of Indias. This reddened my face, but I kept my composure, and she smiled at me and said hello. She was wearing provocative black rags with feathers, as if the fashion of some of the Goths, and she resembled a jackdaw. I was wondering when I'd see you again, Ailey. It's good to see you, Cato. Antonino Arcos, this is the metronome. Pardon, Domino? Yes. He was a friend of Crassus. Crassus was crass. It's an old joke from the seminary. Could put water in his ass and be so excited he daydreams is on his haunches in the state of equilibrium. I'm not kidding. This little foal gets hard for Benin's. It looks like the sail of a ship and sounds like a tipping hollow reed filter. It's like a puppy dog, but I remember as the metronome. Likewise, I remember you as the metropolitan gnome. I sail afloat in Echo Hollow, wave low and am smoke. When it comes to flow, I pen the stone to dough. If I came off in a word to blow, I'd go down below and have no time to row among the lilies and things that grow, and the morrow, sweet morrow, where you always crow. Yes, pal, she exclaimed. That sign back there says you can't see me. Couldn't help but think, seeing you with black feathers like in the morning there below in the crow's nest, up on high. Yeah, that's nice. I have a sweet one back home. This is my boy, she frowned. Well, I've got to see you again, I added enthusiastically. Of course you will. It's not like we aren't neighbors. And what of the future? Keep climbing, cutthroat. You've got 21 to lose, she smiled. Her boyfriend and I peeled out where they encountered me on the block as they made the sign in Cappadocian that said price tag back at me. I wasn't brief what this could mean other than boasting, perhaps owing to a bordello, and made no ask Garthorth about who was master in language and but we was busy, and I stopped to see the woman I had planned on meeting in the palace grounds and held Gaudentius arm to arm when I saw him. I removed my hat and as I walked into the palace grounds where the Praetorians excused my entry. I walked into the sunlit halls with my eyes now accustomed from the training on the fields of Mars to the personal quarters of Eudocia. She answered the door and held her heart, and the handmaiden let me in. You're Gaudentius, writer, aren't you? You're a bit tan. Why, you're almost a Parthian. I tried not to laugh, a lifetime being pale, and now I was too tan from 2 weeks in the field. What was the next to wooing Aelia? What was the next step? Skincare with mints and creams and oranges? Yes, my lady. I'm sorry for your loss. You wanted me to take a letter down for you? Never mind that now. How are you, child? She asked. Couldn't be better. I saw a friend I hadn't seen forever, and my heart is filled with joy. Gaudentius said to tell me that your father-in-law is a pig of a man for being so opportunistic in forcing the marriage. You might as well mean my marriage to be. That girlfriend is yours, a plaything of Palladius. He'll never have enough wealth for her, just as I had never enough prayers to prevent this hostage taking. She sees many men. He doesn't have a ring on his finger yet, I answered, smiling, a bit embarrassed that I had persisted with a promiscuous girl, that I had never remembered as promiscuous. She's in your and Palladius' employ, no? What made her this way? It's been a long time. This was not the first impression I wanted to make with such an influential and, by all accounts, virtuous lady, but I had to know. Well, Cato, you're a man. Men value multiple partners, and the solidest men have an infinite trust in older, richer men. You understand what drives her as well as any man. Showing an infinite trust for her as if she was a woman and not a man, or pawn thereof. I hope I'm not writing this part down, I answered. Of course not. I have no trust or love of either Hunteric or Palladius who sees a girl for what she is. Hunteric is a sadistic monster, and Palladius is a perfumed, drolling dandy, but my father's word is meant to keep the peace, and I want you to send word to Carthage that I consider myself and my sister to be prisoners in our own city, to that defiler Maximus, a conspirator against my own father. I desired to think what your helpless girls and specifically got the jump on you. Liberation. I hope you wrote that down. I nodded quickly, my hands working as fast as I could. I know that the great King Genseric knows that Adia's death was an accident, no accident, and I fear that my father feared that Gaudentius was for what he was, a strong contender for respect in the military. I also know that he sees promise in Olybrius, my sister's husband. It should have been, should my father have perished, but instead it went to the hand of vengeance. That my father had not perished. Tell him that the hand of vengeance is too plump to pull off its rings and losing the support of the people quickly. Tell him the insult of my father's kill is the assumption upon my mother. Those rings are his to cleave off. Tell him Genseric, our emperor, means to replace the peace between him and the Visigoths, and thumb his nose at the very Eastern Theodosian legacy that brought me and my sister into this world. Tell him Majorian, prince of the Praetorian Guard, still favors my mother and sister. And if he cannot be respected as a rival, he can be respected as a man. Tell him I'm the willing Helen of Troy for Sparta's sake. And when you get there, tell him his son Hunneric is not the only one who sends gruesome messages across the sea. Tell him it is upon you in the form of you and Gatherith's soon-to-be broken heart and scarce humanity. I finished writing, and my hand quavered a bit. Do you mean to threaten me, Domina? Maximus plotted for over 12 years. You couldn't guess that he could handle a few days of playtime in his new position. And Cato, stay away from Tostilla and Attila rewarded by him, and pray for my father's soul that we don't join him very soon. Rome has only been plundered twice in her history, first by the Bovian Gauls over 1,000 years ago, and again during Alaric and the reign of Honorius. There was a peaceful way for your family to escape Rome, I am for it, but the ransacking the Roman capital was accompanied by torture, rape, destruction, and murder. That is too much to ask for a handful of people, I told her. I took the letter in my own words, which were approved by the princess in diligence, and then shared it with Gaudentius and Galarith, putting her official seal and stamp on it in the Mint of Valentinian, which had not had been time to be replaced by Petronius' seal, a Trojan horse against his own interest in communications. I wondered what Petronius had in store for Galarith and I heard the crew of the Black Arrow had been working carving rock to the south in Ancona, so I expected them to protect us. The princess seemed like a graceful and kind lady, and I felt for her plight, knowing the new emperor's extreme vindictiveness. She respected Gaudentius, and now she was essentially asking Genseric to kidnap all of them, the old guard of the West. I even learned that in Constantinople, Daniel the Stalit, a man who stood on a pillar prophesying, had a vision of Placidia, Eudocia, and Lavinia being rescued from the evils of Petronius in Rome. He had never had an incorrect portent. Although the military was strong, it was not fully committed yet what gold told them to do, for an untried and untrue commander in Maximus, and Avitus, who was more scholarly and religious in this phase of life, making many monastic retreats to pray for the fate of the West. I could only pray, and drink mightily as well.